Chapter 1, Acceptance Letter. It was summer. The sun was veiled behind a thin layer of clouds, its light slightly dimmed. Under a large banyan tree, a petite girl with long black hair rested her chin in her palm, lounging on a long wicker chair. Not far from her, a group of children around 8 or 9 years old were playing boisterously. Anne sat still, lost in a whirlwind of thoughts. This all began 2 days ago. She had awoken from a long period of darkness, her last memory before that being the moment she was wheeled into an operating room, overwhelmed by bright lights and muffled voices. She'd thought that waking up after such darkness would mean a new life, and it was. Just not in the way she'd expected. Because she had awakened in an entirely different world. The first thing she heard was a trembling voice speaking in English, something about pity and kindness. Before the words even finished, a cup of water was pressed to her lips. Her body felt like it had been propped up with a wooden stick, and the oversized transparent glass tipped water into her mouth. Her blurry vision caught the face of an elderly woman with blonde hair. As the cup was pulled away, her gaze drifted from the old woman's face to a white ceiling. Only when the footsteps faded away did she begin to grasp the absurdity of her situation. On the first day, she was still too weak from the illness and soon fell asleep again. On the second day, just barely able to get out of bed, she was led out by a plump, smiling white woman. Anne lifted her small, soft hand and let out a long sigh. In her past life, there were so many things she couldn't let go of, her mother, her father, and especially her younger brother, who was 18 years her junior. Even though she had come to see the fickleness of human nature in her last few months, they were still her family. She pinched her cheek. The pain was real. She probably wouldn't be going back. Looking around again, she noticed a British flag fluttering in front of a white 3-story house. If she wasn't mistaken, this was England. Probably sometime around the late 1980s. At breakfast, she had seen the old lady from yesterday sitting beside a black rotary phone in the corner of the hall. I've read so many transmigration novels, but when it actually happens to me, it really doesn't feel that great. Anne muttered. Well, at least I didn't end up in some ancient era. This is still the modern world. I guess I'll just have to accept it. 3 months later, Anne, no, she supposed she should now be called Anne Reeve, had finally relearned enough English to grasp her situation. It was 1987 in the United Kingdom. Her new identity, Anne Lawrence Reeve, an orphan who had been sent to the orphanage by relatives. At age 1, Anne's parents had died in a car accident. By law, she was placed in the care of her uncle, Garnet. Things were fine at first, but when another child joined the family and financial strain set in, the now 8-year-old Anne was sent to an orphanage. The young Anne, frightened and unable to adapt, had fallen gravely ill. That illness had taken her, making room for Anne's soul to arrive. Upon learning Anne's story from the chatty old lady Mrs. Allen, Anne felt deep sorrow for the girl. At least in her previous life, she'd known love, even if it was fleeting. Perhaps it was sympathy. Perhaps it was her own brush with death. Perhaps it was the many thoughts that had weighed on her during those final months. But Anne decided this time, she would try harder. Back then, she was a mediocre science student, but she'd earned a bachelor's degree in economics and worked in investment banking for 2 years. With her foresight of global trends in the coming years, she was confident she could go further in this new world. The Jesk orphanage was located on the outskirts of London, government-run, covering around 100 acres with a white 3-story building housing over 100 children. Rooms were allocated by age. Children aged 8 to 11 had their own rooms, while those over 11 were sent to boarding school in East London. The younger ones attended the nearby Maria Church Primary School. Anne spent 3 years in the orphanage, attending school and dreaming of growing up faster. Anne, wait up! Jill called out as Anne was just about to leave the classroom. Anne slowed her steps and glanced back. Jill was hurriedly stuffing books and pens into her bag. All right, but you'd better be quick. When they reached the stairs, Jill wiped sweat from her brow and threw an arm over Anne's shoulder, panting. "Couldn't you wait a little longer?" Anne pulled Jill's hand off and gave her a serious look. "Technically, I did wait. Otherwise, I'd already be at the school gate." Jill rolled her eyes. "Fine, fine, you win. Here, carry this for me." She shoved her bag at Anne, then quickly tied her golden hair into a ponytail using a butterfly hair tie. She shook her head to feel the breeze. "Ah, much better." Anne glanced at the sky. The sun had already dipped halfway down the horizon, painting half the sky red. "And you were walking around the classroom with your hair down. It's summer, you know." Jill ruffled Anne's short black hair. I know. But long hair's pretty, okay? I can't pull off your short hair look, it's way too cute." As Jill reached out to pinch Anne's cheek, Anne quickly sidestepped and smacked her hand away. "Hey! Hands off!" Jill retracted her hand, feigning a hurt look. "I just wanted to give you a friendly squeeze. We're friends, aren't we? Your cheeks are as soft as my puppy's." Anne's expression darkened. She turned away and picked up her pace. That puppy was Jill's newborn dog, Tiny. Okay, I'm sorry. I meant it as a compliment." "Really? You're so small and cute, are you sure you're already 11? Jill tried to keep up, but Anne only walked faster. Back at the orphanage, Anne greeted the busy headmistress, "Mrs. Odette, I'm home." The plump woman wiped her hands on her apron, then smiled and nodded. "Oh, Anne, sweet child. You're back early today. Go ahead to your room, most of the children aren't back yet." Anne smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Odette. I'll head up now." "What a polite little girl," Mrs. Odette muttered fondly as she turned back to her work. Then, as if remembering something, she picked up a fork and rushed to the stairs. "Anne! You got 3 letters today. I left them in your room." Anne's head peeked out at the top of the stairs. "Letters? What?" "Oh yes, dear, 3 of them. One's from St. Edmund's School, probably your application results. And another, from some academy," she called excitedly. Anne's head quickly ducked out of sight. "Thank you," came a shout, followed by a storm of footsteps pounding upstairs. Mrs. Odette chuckled to herself. "Oh, Anne's growing up. St. Edmund's School. That's such a good school." Anne burst into her room, dropped her bag on the bed, and rushed to her desk. There they were, a white envelope with the St. Edmund's School emblem, and 2 smaller grayish-yellow envelopes. She picked up the white one, ran her fingers over the school crest, pinched the quality paper, then turned it over to the seal, only to hesitate just as she was about to tear it open. Reading aloud, slowly and clearly, she said, "To Anne Reeve, Jesk Orphanage, Beckenham, London. From, St. Edmund's School, London. I finally got it. All those efforts these past 3 years weren't for nothing. The best public school in London. If I can study there, maybe I can even get into Oxford or Cambridge. Once that happens, I'll be free from this place." Taking a deep breath, she pushed the clutter aside and laid the envelope flat on the desk. Sitting properly, she carefully used a ruler to open the seal and unfolded the letter inside. When she reached the line, "Congratulations, you have been accepted to St. Edmund's School," she leapt to her feet, knocking over the chair. Waving the letter in the air, she laughed out loud. "Ha ha! I can finally leave the orphanage. I'm free." After all, she was an adult soul in a sea of children. Living the same routine every day, school, orphanage, was exhausting, even for someone as patient as her. Now, she finally had a way to take charge of her life. She neatly folded the acceptance letter back into the envelope and placed it in her drawer, then picked up one of the grey-yellow envelopes. "Hey? Who else would write to me?" Could it be Uncle Garnet? The envelope had only her name on it. But hadn't her uncle already abandoned her? Puzzled, she flipped it over. There, sealed with red wax, was a crest she vaguely recognized. Who still uses wax seals in this era? And this emblem? I swear I've seen it before. Maybe on TV. Inside were 2 thick sheets of folded parchment. With even more confusion, Anne opened one. And froze. In elegant script, it read: Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorc, CHF Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Confeet of Wizards. Dear Miss Reeve, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A list of required books and equipment is enclosed. An owl will arrive at your mailbox on July 25, 1990, to await your reply. Her hand trembled. Her breathing quickened. This has to be a joke. What is this? Anne snatched the envelope and examined the red wax seal again. Then, without thinking, she shouted, Harry Potter! Chapter 2, Aaron Hall. The moment Anne blurted out those words, she instantly regretted it. If this letter really was authentic, then that meant this was the mysterious wizarding world, and who knew if there were wizards secretly monitoring this place. After taking a couple of deep breaths, Anne calmed herself. Clutching the parchment letter, she scanned the desk with her eyes in search of the second yellowed envelope. She pulled it out from under a stack of papers and books and tore it open. Inside was another thick sheet of parchment, but this one was far shorter. In elegant calligraphy, it read: Dear Miss Anne Reeve, please remain at home at 8 p.m. on July 24, 1990. Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Anne quickly read through the contents, then flipped the page over and checked the envelope, finding no other items. She tilted her head thoughtfully. Perhaps this body's identity wasn't as simple as it seemed. Just as she was deep in thought, a knock sounded at the door, followed by Ida's cheerful voice. Oh, poor Anne, come down, it's dinner time. Coming, Mrs. Ida. Anne called back, stuffing the letter into its envelope and stacking all 3 letters neatly on her desk before heading downstairs. Dinner passed in a blur. She barely tasted the food and only gave half-hearted responses when Headmistress Odette asked about her letter from London Kelford School. Afterward, as she made her way toward the stairs, she stopped halfway and turned abruptly toward a grandfather clock. It read 7:50. What's today's date, Mrs. Odette? She asked. Odette, busy directing the cleanup of dinnerware, turned and smiled warmly. Why, it's July 24th, dear. Anne gave a polite thank you and hurried up the stairs. Back in her room, she picked up the second yellow envelope again and reread the contents of the parchment. She glanced at the time, then peered out the window. The Ministry of Magic. It had been so long since she'd heard that name. She'd only ever watched the Harry Potter movies, multiple times, yes, but the details had faded over the years. Regardless of whether she would actually attend Hogwarts, she knew one thing for certain: she needed to write down every plot point she could remember as soon as possible. Knowing the future was a massive advantage, especially since the Wizarding and Muggle worlds had both suffered when Voldemort returned. What would the Wizarding world be like? Was it really like the movies? Part of her was excited. This was Hogwarts, after all, a magical world completely different from the world of physics and reason. Anne paced between her desk and the door, trying to recall as much of the plot as possible. She adjusted her clothes nervously, smoothed down her shirt, and wandered back and forth a few more times. Then she stopped by the window and chuckled softly, pulling up a chair to open the window. A cool breeze blew in, carrying the scent of summer grass. It helped calm her down. She leaned out, letting the silver moonlight wash over her face. Below, the orphanage lawn stretched wide and empty. A few scattered pine and birch trees stood in the distance. She could hear Odette's voice drifting up from the floor below, along with the occasional bark and the soft chorus of insects. Shaking her head, she pulled back inside. Her behavior since receiving the Hogwarts letter now seemed a little ridiculous. Maybe she was just overwhelmed by too many surprises in one day. Jumping down from the chair, she grabbed a book and sat upright at her desk. No matter what happens, I'll face it head on, she thought. When I came to this world, I didn't panic. I observed and adapted. I'll do the same now. Whatever this magical world holds, I'll go see it, but I won't forget to stay grounded in the human world. She nodded to herself. Downstairs, the second hand of the large wooden clock in the orphanage ticked closer to the 12. Tick. It hit the top. Tick. It moved past. Upstairs in Anne's room. A flash of white light shimmered in the small space between the bed, the desk, and the door. A figure took form from thin air. Anne turned sharply at the soft poof behind her. Standing there was a man wearing a grey wool coat over a rumpled, filthy plaid shirt with 2 buttons undone. He wore dark jeans and had messy, curly light brown hair. His face was scruffy and unshaven, and he was grinning at her with barely contained excitement. Anne stepped down from her chair and frowned slightly. She rubbed her nose. The man smelled odd. Like a blend of barnyard animals, cows, sheep, maybe even goats. "You're a wizard?" she asked skeptically. Her tone was justified. If this man hadn't just appeared out of thin air, she'd have assumed he was a vagrant or a burglar. The man nodded eagerly, stepping forward with open arms as if he meant to hug her. Anne pinched her nose and backed away until she was against her desk. You kind of smell." The man froze mid-step, visibly embarrassed. He mumbled something under his breath, "Magical Creatures Department, ridiculous," and then suddenly pulled out a black wand. "So that's a wand," Anne thought, her curiosity piqued. "Scour Jiffy," he said. A flash of silver light shimmered at the tip of the wand. His clothes instantly became neat and spotless, and the strange odor vanished. Anne let go of her nose. This man was indeed a wizard, and by the looks of it, someone who'd known her parents. "Hello, I'm Anne Reeve," she said, tilting her head slightly and pointing to the letter on her desk. "I've read the letter." The man tucked his wand into his sleeve and crouched down. He started to reach out to pat her head but hesitated when he saw her wary eyes. Instead, he shifted his hand lower to offer a handshake. Anne touched his hand briefly. His was large, twice the size of hers, and slightly trembling. After the handshake, she gave him a curious look. "You really do look like your parents," the man said softly. "Hello, Anne. I'm Aaron Hall, your parents' dearest friend." "My parents?" Anne feigned surprise. Though she had already guessed the truth, that Anne's parents had likely been wizards, possibly victims of Voldemort's rise to power. The Ministry must have hidden Anne away in the Muggle world to protect her. But her current body was only 11 years old. She had no memory of her parents or their past. Since waking in this body at 8 years old, she had inherited none of the real Anne's memories. In the past 3 years, the only contact had been one birthday card from her uncle Garnet, telling her birthday was on May 17th, making her a Taurus. After that, nothing. Not a word. Sometimes, when Anne remembered her own parents from her previous life, a deep sorrow would well up inside her, stronger than her own grief. It made her sympathize with this little girl even more. She silently vowed to live her best life for both herself and Anne. "But, my parents died in a car crash. If you were their best friend, why didn't you ever come to see me?" she asked coldly. Aaron's expression fell. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, staring at the young girl who looked so much like his lost friends. "It was Ministry policy. Wizards aren't allowed to be exposed to Muggles, and you were so young." Seeing Anne's expression grow colder, Aaron quickly added, "But I did check on you." I came every year on your birthday. Last year you spent it at your friend Jill's house, didn't you? Anne's heart skipped a beat. So they had been watching. Good thing she hadn't done anything too out of the ordinary, like, say, being a soul from another world. But what exactly did this man come here for? Then why can you visit me now? Oh. Aaron smacked his forehead like he'd just remembered. Today's your big day, Anne. Come on, I'm taking you somewhere special. I'll explain everything on the way. He stood up and firmly took her right hand in his left, wand in his right. He gave her a reassuring smile. Don't be afraid. What happens next will be magical. He swished his wand in a practiced arc. Apparate. Darkness. Anne felt like she'd been sucked into a black hole. Her whole body was squeezed, like being underwater. A large hand held hers tightly. This man really did care for Anne, didn't he? Maybe she wouldn't be so alone in the wizarding world after all. Especially if he worked in the Ministry's department for the regulation and control of magical creatures. She vaguely remembered something from Harry Potter. Wasn't Hagrid involved with magical creatures too? She needed to write all of this down later. Memory fades, but notes last forever. Just then, light returned. Her feet hit solid ground. She looked around. They were standing near a street with an old car parked not far away and a street lamp nearby. In front of her stood a black wooden door, completely out of place with the rest of the cityscape. We're here. Aaron beamed down at her. He gave her hand a tug and pushed open the door. Welcome to the Leaky Cauldron. Remember this place, you'll come here a lot. Your dad and I met here for the first time. He was such a short little guy back then. As the door opened, the heavy smell of butter and alcohol rushed out, followed by a chorus of voices. The pub was dimly lit by a few oil lamps. A large square table in the center was crowded with people playing cards, while the smaller tables were packed with oddly dressed individuals. At least, they seemed odd to Anne, who came from the Muggle world. Who wore a scarf in summer. Then again, it was a little chilly here. She tugged at her short sleeves. Aaron led her through the bustling crowd. Just as they were passing the bar, a raspy voice called out. Hey! Aaron! Been a while, hasn't it? Anne turned toward the source of the voice. A bald, wrinkled man in his 50s squinted at Aaron from behind the bar. Hey, Tom, Aaron greeted him. Been busy lately. But I've got something important to do today. He gestured to Anne. I'm taking Anne to Diagon Alley. Merlin's beard, is this? Lambert's daughter. Tom squinted harder. Aaron pulled Anne a little closer and nodded. Yes. This is Anne Reeve, Lambert's girl. Anne offered a polite smile. Nice to meet you. I am. Well, I won't keep you then, Tom said, turning back to the bar. Next time, come have a drink. Aaron led Anne past the bar and into a small courtyard behind it. That was Tom, the Leaky Cauldron's owner, he said. Your dad and I knew him when we were students. They stopped in front of a brick wall with a trash bin nearby. Watch carefully, Anne. This is how you get into Diagon Alley. It's where you'll buy everything for school. You count up 3 bricks, then 2 across, and tap it 3 times with your wand. As Aaron demonstrated, Anne's eyes widened in awe. A small hole appeared in the wall, growing rapidly until it formed an arched passage tall enough for a person to walk through. Welcome to Diagon Alley. Welcome to the wizarding world, Aaron said with a smile. Hold on tight, there's a lot of people in there. Still holding hands, they stepped through the passage together. Chapter 3, The Inheritance of Her Parents. As soon as they stepped through the passageway, the view before them opened up in an instant. Anne turned around to look behind her, only to find that the passage had vanished and become a solid stone wall. Aaron led her forward a few steps onto a cobbled path. Though the path wasn't wide, it bustled with foot traffic, and the lights from the surrounding shops made it bright as day. Just outside the closest shop stood a tall, thin man holding something that looked like licorice root, enthusiastically advertising it to passers-by. Being dragged along by Erin, Anne wished she had a smartphone so she could capture everything around her. What she'd seen in the movies paled in comparison to the shock of experiencing it all in person. Ding-a-ling, a bell chimed as the door to a nearby shop swung open. Gurgle gurgle, a cauldron of green, viscous liquid bubbled by another storefront. Anne leaned in and sniffed curiously, only to be hit with the stench of rotting oranges. Unfamiliar and bizarre items flooded her vision one after another. Anne couldn't get enough. She glanced left and right eagerly, full of curiosity and questions about the magical world. Erin led her to a gleaming white building that stood significantly taller than the surrounding shops. A small goblin stood by the bronze-colored door, about the same height as Anne. It had dark skin, a pointed chin, long ears, and unusually long fingers. "This is our destination for today, Gringotts," Erin declared, guiding her inside. Mr. Hall." Anne tugged on Erin's sleeve. "Erin uncle, Anne, just call me Uncle Erin," he corrected with a smile, pausing to look at her. "What's wrong?" "Uncle Erin, just now." Anne glanced back at the goblin by the entrance, a little wary. "What is that?" she asked, nervously pointing before lowering her hand. Following her gaze, Erin chuckled to himself, slightly regretful. She might have been smart and composed for her age, but she was still only 11. Of course she'd be scared seeing a whole new world for the first time. In a soothing tone, he explained, "That's a goblin, Anne. They might look a bit frightening and aren't the friendliest bunch, but they won't hurt you. In fact, they're the best when it comes to managing wealth. They run this place." Anne frowned slightly. "So that's a goblin?" They didn't look quite like the ones in the movies. Thinking she was still frightened, Erin gently ruffled her short black hair. "From now on, you've got Uncle Erin. Whenever something troubles you, you can come to me, all right? I'll always help you." He knelt down to her eye level. "Did you know? If it hadn't been for everything that happened, I would have been your godfather. So don't be afraid." His sincere gaze stirred something in Anne. There were times she had felt terrified of facing the world alone. Sure, she was an adult with a golden finger and knowledge of this world's future, but humans are social creatures. She nodded seriously, not even minding that he'd ruffled her hair again. Erin straightened up, a warm smile on his face. Such a sensible, clever child, he thought. "Lambert, Sonia, I promised you, I'll take care of her." Soon, they entered a great hall made entirely of white marble. Over 100 goblins sat behind high counters, writing in ledgers, weighing coins on brass scales, and examining gemstones through magnifying glasses. Wizards and witches in black or grey robes moved about, passing in and out of doors with goblin escorts. Erin led Anne straight to a goblin at an empty counter. "Good evening. We'd like to retrieve something from the vault of Anne Reeve." "Do you have the key, sir?" the goblin asked, glancing up. "Of course." Erin let go of Anne's hand. "Wait here, Anne." He opened his coat and retrieved a small golden key from an inner pocket. After handing it to the goblin, he took Anne's hand again. Anne could sense that he was afraid she might wander off, and allowed herself to be led while curiously eyeing the goblin beside them, who was weighing a fist-sized piece of obsidian. The goblin inspected the key and nodded. "Very well. I'll send someone to escort you to Vault 463. Grip hug." Another goblin emerged from behind the counter and bowed politely before leading them to a small door. Though it was called small, it still stood half a head taller than Erin, only small in comparison to the massive 5-meter-high doors nearby. Anne followed them into the archway lit by torches on either side. The stone path sloped downward until they reached a dead end, where a rail track floated over a vast, dark underground chasm. Tracks crisscrossed above and below, suspended in midair. Anne gasped in awe, just as a cart sped along one of the rails and screeched to a stop before them. Aaron scooped her up at once. "Careful," he said gently. Anne flushed and stuck out her tongue sheepishly. She hadn't expected such a huge underground cavern, or floating tracks. Aaron didn't scold her at all. Still smiling, he jumped into the cart with her and said, "Amazing, isn't it? I was even more stunned the first time I came. This is Gringotts, the safest bank in the world." He shifted her so she could see the depths below. "No one knows how deep it goes. Your father used to say it must go all the way to the Earth's core." Though she appreciated his care, Anne squirmed, not used to being held like this. Aaron noticed and set her down with a grin. "Ah, is Anne shy now?" he teased, ruffling her hair again. Anne glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, starting to doubt whether this man was really a responsible adult wizard. He didn't feel all that reliable. The cart raced along the tracks, left, right, up, down, until it screeched to a stop in front of a stone vault door. The landing before the vault looked like it had been carved into a cliff wall, just big enough to stand on, with a heavy stone door embedded in the rock. The goblin stepped forward, and a nearby lamp flickered to life. Aaron lifted Anne onto the platform and followed. Resting a hand on her shoulder, he said, "Watch closely, Anne. This is the inheritance your parents left you." The goblin tapped the door, which slowly rumbled open to reveal heaps of gold, silver, and bronze coins, as well as shelves of jars and crystal balls. Aaron led the wide-eyed Anne into the vault. "All of this is yours." Anne stared in disbelief at the mound of glittering coins. "This has to be a dream. There's no way this is real. I was mentally prepared to earn money by trading reeves or oil in the Muggle market. But this? Gold coins. I thought I'd be a poor orphan in a new world with just a photographic memory cheat." Swallowing hard, she finally managed to say, "All of this is mine." Aaron gave her a firm nod and walked to the wall to retrieve a small crystal ball, which he sealed in a little box from his pocket. Having calmed down, Anne reminded herself that after all she'd been through, even death, this was nothing. Besides, this wasn't just random wealth. It was her parents' legacy. "Uncle Aaron, my parents, did they really die in a car crash? Weren't they wizards?" Aaron knelt again and held her shoulders. "You're still young. When you're older, I'll explain everything. Just remember, your parents wanted you to live a happy life. That's all." Anne had already guessed her parents might have been connected to Voldemort's era, but Aaron clearly wasn't ready to tell her more. That was fine, there'd be time. Her parents had given her a new life. Even if she barely remembered them, for Anne's sake. "Uncle Aaron, could you tell me more about them sometime?" I don't really remember anything about them," she asked quietly, tugging at her sleeve. Of course. Your mother, Sonia Roland, was a brilliant Ravenclaw with beautiful amber eyes, just like yours. Your father, Lambert Reeve, was a Slytherin prefect. And I, Aaron Hall, was the Gryffindor prefect," he added with pride. Seeing Anne's curious face, he smiled. "But we'll save those stories for later. For now, we need to take out some money for your Hogwarts tuition. It's late, so we can't get your wand tonight, but we can still stop by Madame Malkin's for robe measurements." He took out a gold, silver, and bronze coin. "This is a galleon, this is a sickle, and this is a nut. 1 galleon equals 17 sickles, 1 sickle equals 29 nuts. Easy enough." He slipped the coins into her pocket. Anne was intrigued by the exchange rates. When he finished explaining, she'd already memorized it, though she did find the conversion a little strange. "Uncle Aaron, what about Muggleborns? What if they don't have money like this?" she asked, genuinely curious. Aaron answered casually, "Gringotts can exchange Muggle money too. If a Muggle receives a Hogwarts letter, an owl will wait for a reply, and a special wizard will come to guide them. He didn't realize how insightful that question was for someone encountering the magical world for the first time. Anne nodded. That makes sense. Wizards have to live in the Muggle world too, of course they need a proper system for that. After filling a pouch with coins, they left the vault. The goblin sealed the door with a flick of its long fingers. Back in the main hall, they received a parchment record, 1 crystal ball, 200 galleons, and 100 sickles. Anne signed her name in flowing script, Anne Reeve. Aaron tucked the golden key back into his coat. From today onward, I'm your legal guardian. I'll keep this key safe for you until you turn 16, which is when you'll be considered an adult in the wizarding world. If you need anything, just let me know. All right. Anne nodded. Better for a wizard to keep the key. If she had to carry it herself, she'd never sleep well, not with that much money on the line. Next, they stopped by Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. Aside from a brief scare when a measuring tape suddenly sprang to life, everything went smoothly. Afterward, a disapparition brought them back to the orphanage. In Anne's small room, Aaron pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to her. Anne, I have to go now. Tomorrow, you can reply to Hogwarts and say I'll accompany you. I'll come again in the afternoon so we can buy the rest of your school supplies. He paused and gave a sheepish smile. I may have been a little impulsive tonight. He didn't finish his sentence but instead pointed at the box in her hands. Open it, place your hand on top, and really feel it. I think you'll like it. With those parting words, he vanished. A/N, I've changed a setting, an important one. Wizards in this world come of age at 16. Chapter 4, The Wand. After reading Aaron's note, Anne glanced suspiciously at the letter on her desk. Could that ministry letter be a fake? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. Her eyes drifted back to the small box in her hands. It was pale blue, secured with a clasp. She unlatched it carefully, revealing a small crystal orb nestled quietly inside. Tilting her head, Anne tried to recall what crystal balls were used for. Divination was the only thing that came to mind. She reached out and wrapped her fingers around the orb, and the moment her skin made contact, her surroundings shifted. Though she was clearly still in her room, it felt as if she had stepped into another space. Before her appeared a cozy sitting room. On the couch sat a man and a woman. The woman cradled a baby in her arms, while the man was gently teasing the infant, his face beaming with joy. Anne blurted out without thinking, "Dad." "Mom." He, just look how adorable Anne is," Lambert chuckled as he played with the baby, speaking softly to Sonia. Sonia responded with a warm, silent smile, her eyes full of tenderness. "Look at her eyes, they're just like yours. She's bound to be just as beautiful as you," Lambert said, glancing at Sonia with a hint of shyness as she adjusted the cloth wrapping around the baby. "I just hope she grows up happy," Sonia whispered. "A peaceful, ordinary life would be enough." "That wouldn't be so bad," Lambert agreed, then continued with mock indignation, "but I was talking with Aaron the other day, and that guy actually wants our daughter to go to Gryffindor. A bunch of impulsive, hot-headed lions? No way. I'd much prefer her to follow in your footsteps and go to Ravenclaw. Isn't it a bit early to be thinking about all this?" Sonia teased. "Besides, I thought you'd want her in Slytherin." "No chance," Lambert said with a laugh. "I know those boys too well. If my daughter went there, they'd have it way too easy." Sonia giggled, drawing out her words, "But you were a Slytherin, and their prefect, no less." "Exactly. I know what they're like. Any boy who wants to marry my daughter will have to pass many tests first. If she really ends up in Slytherin, those punks would get off too lightly. What if she ends up in Hufflepuff?" Sonia teased again. "Then I'll make sure the prefect of that year knows, if anyone bullies Anne, they'll have to answer to me." "Oh, and we'll definitely have to notify Aaron, he was Gryffindor's prefect, after all. That way, no one would dare mess with her. As Lambert finished speaking, a fog rolled in, washing out the image until it completely faded away. Anne sat there holding the crystal orb, tears brimming in her eyes. The next morning, Anne woke up and immediately glanced at her desk. The pale blue box still lay there, exactly as she had left it. After getting dressed, she went downstairs holding a neatly written note in one hand. The note politely informed Hogwarts that Aaron would be escorting her and that she didn't require assistance from their assigned witches or wizards. In the dining hall, Headmistress Odette was busy clearing the table. Anne greeted her politely and slipped outside. Not far from the house, a cobbled path led to a long, dusty concrete road. At the edge where the paths met stood two white mailboxes, and perched atop one of them was a brown owl. Anne approached, and the owl flapped its wings before extending a leg toward her. She slipped the note into a small pouch tied to its leg and thanked it. The owl took off immediately into the sky. After breakfast, Anne told a small lie. "Mrs. Odette, I made plans with Jill to go out this afternoon. I might not be back until evening." She didn't want the headmistress to know anything about the magical world, so this was the best she could do. Mrs. Odette nodded without suspicion and reminded her to stay safe. Back in her room, Anne sat at her desk and pulled out an old, half-used notebook from the drawer. The first half was filled with notes, the second was still blank. She began scribbling down everything she could remember about the Harry Potter series using a code only she could understand. Thanks to her photographic memory, she retained much, but many memories from her past life had faded with time, especially the Harry Potter films she had watched back in high school. Even though she had seen them more than once, she only remembered the rough outlines of the 8 movies. By the time she finished organizing her notes, the whole morning had passed. After reviewing her work to make sure no one else could understand it, she closed the notebook, returned it to the drawer, and headed downstairs for lunch. When Mrs. Odette left for a meeting in London and Grandma Ida took the younger children out to the lawn to play, Anne stayed behind, waiting in her room with her satchel slung over one shoulder. About 15 minutes later, a folded paper airplane fluttered in through the window and hovered right in front of her nose. Anne immediately recognized it as the ministry's usual form of correspondence. She caught it, unfolded it, and read the hastily scrawled message. "Dear Anne. Sorry. I forgot to mention, today I can't use magic. Could you come out to the road in front of the orphanage? I'll be waiting there. Aaron Hall." After reading, the airplane flattened into a blank sheet of paper. Anne tucked it into a drawer and jogged downstairs. When she reached the road, she spotted Aaron across the street, waving at her in a white shirt. A black sedan stood parked beside him. "Good afternoon, Uncle Aaron," Anne greeted as she approached, eyeing both him and the car. "Aha! Good afternoon, Anne." Aaron opened the passenger side door for her, and once she was seated, he climbed into the driver's seat. "Surprised?" Anne nodded. "Why? Why would a wizard have a car, right?" "Well, we operate in the Muggle world too, so the ministry provided me with one. We can't use magic all the time." "Then last night?" About that." Aaron looked momentarily awkward. "Let's keep last night between us, okay?" Anne blinked. "Wait, so the letter was fake?" "What? No, of course not. That ministry letter was real. I just might have moved the date forward a little bit," he muttered, cheeks flushing as he averted his gaze. Anne shook her head with a sigh. "You're really bold, Uncle Aaron." "All right, enough about that. Today, we're off to explore Diagon Alley and pick up all your school supplies. Did you bring the Hogwarts list?" "Yes," Anne said, patting her bag. They parked outside the Leaky Cauldron. Compared to last night, the pub was nearly empty, only 4 or 5 people quietly chatting inside. Stepping through the archway, Anne once again entered Diagon Alley. In daylight, the street was far more lively than it had been at night. Sunlight bathed the cobbled road, and shopkeepers shouted as they hawked their wares. Wizards in black robes bustled past, while children around Anne's age trailed behind adults, staring wide-eyed in all directions. Some people dressed in obvious muggle clothes also mingled in the crowd. "We'll get your wand first," Aaron said, tugging the wide-eyed Anne toward Ollivanders. A group of boys was crowded around a glass display case, admiring a broomstick. One read aloud, "The latest Nimbus 2000. Fastest in the world. The best companion for any Quidditch player, own it now." Anne leaned closer, curious about the broom, but Aaron gently pulled her back. "Ah, little first years can't bring broomsticks, remember." A nearby shop displayed stacks of parchment in every color imaginable, and another was releasing faint green smoke that smelled like bitter melon. So many wizards in the UK? The magical economy is booming, Anne thought. Diagon Alley must be the wizarding world's version of a central business district. They stopped in front of a small, weathered shop. The sign read, "Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. In the dusty window, a single wand sat alone on a faded purple cushion. Aaron pushed open the door, leading Anne into the cramped shop. There was only a single bench and rows upon rows of narrow boxes stacked on towering shelves that reached the ceiling. "Have a seat, Anne. Mr. Ollivander should be." Before he could finish, a soft voice said, "Good afternoon." Anne and Aaron both jumped. An elderly man stepped out from behind a shelf. His silver-white eyes seemed to gleam. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ollivander," Aaron greeted politely. Anne quickly echoed, "Good afternoon." "Ah yes, Aaron Hall. Hawthorn wood, phoenix feather core, 11 inches. A fine wand," Ollivander murmured. Aaron gently nudged Anne forward. "Sir, this is Anne Reeve. She needs a wand." Of course, of course. Another year at Hogwarts. Let's see." Ollivander pulled out a long silver measuring tape. "Which is your wand hand?" "Right hand, sir," Anne replied, raising her hand. "Reeve. Reeve. Ah yes, Lambert Reeve, 11.5 inches, camphor wood, unicorn hair, firm. Every Ollivander wand contains powerful magical substances, that's their essence. We use unicorn hair, phoenix feather, and dragon heartstring. Each wand is unique, as no two magical cores are exactly alike. A wand that truly belongs to someone else will never perform as well." As he spoke, he began measuring Anne, while the tape continued moving on its own. So this measuring tape is magical too, Anne realized. "Try this one, beechwood, phoenix feather, 9 inches. She barely touched the wand before Ollivander snatched it back. "No, not that one. Try this, ebony wood, dragon heartstring, 9.5 inches. Again, he took it back immediately. After testing 13 or 14 wands, none satisfied him. "A picky customer, how delightful. It's been a while," he muttered, disappearing deeper into the shelves. Anne glanced nervously at Aaron, who quickly reassured her. "Don't worry, Anne. Finding the right wand isn't easy. Oh, it's not you who chooses the wand, but the wand that chooses the wizard. Here, try this, 11 inches, sycamore wood, dragon heartstring." The moment Anne held the light-colored wand with fine wood grain, her fingertips tingled. She gave it a gentle wave, and a flash of silver light burst out, knocking all the nearby boxes onto the floor. Anne gasped. "I'm so sorry, sir." But Ollivander didn't seem to hear. He just nodded. "Wonderful. A fine wand. It has chosen its wizard. That'll be 12 galleons." Aaron pulled some coins from his pocket, counted out 12 galleons, and handed them over. "Thank you, Mr. Ollivander." Anne quickly added her own thanks. Together, they stepped out of the shop, wand in hand. Uncle Aaron, Mr. Ollivander is. That's just how he is, Anne, Aaron said with a laugh. All right, let's get the rest of your supplies. Anne cast one last glance at the small, dusty shop behind her. The wizarding world really isn't something you can understand with Muggle logic. Not long after they left, a little girl arrived at Ollivander's, flanked by her Muggle parents. She had a bushy mane of brown hair and 2 large front teeth. Beaming with excitement, she pushed open the door. A/N, next chapter, they will finally meet. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 5, First Encounters. After purchasing a set of crystal potion vials, Anne's shoulder bag was already packed full, and Aaron's hands were filled with shopping bags. Yet, they still hadn't crossed everything off the list. There were books to buy and a pet owl still missing. Uncle Aaron, Anne tugged on his sleeve as they made their way toward Flourish and Blots, we really can't carry any more. I think we need a trunk to put everything in. She lifted her swollen bag, genuinely worried it might burst at any moment. And, she added nervously, I can't take all this stuff back with me. I didn't tell Headmistress Odette about today. I just told her I was out playing with Jill. Aaron chuckled, it's all right, Anne. You handled it well, it's better if she doesn't know. That'd only lead to trouble. He glanced at the overloaded bags and then at Anne's bulging satchel, which now looked almost as wide as she was. He set the bags down and took Anne's satchel, slinging it around his neck before picking everything back up. I should have thought of that. Let's go to the general store and find you a small trunk. One with an undetectable extension charm should do nicely. And we'll get you a map of Hogwarts too, I think you'll need it. Feel free to look around yourself, Anne. I bet you'll like some of the toys they have there. Once the trunk was sorted, they headed into Flourish and Blots. The shop was much larger than Ollivander's, 2 floors stacked with books. Some were wrapped in fine fleece covers, others bound in simple parchment. Anne even spotted a palm-sized book covered in symbols she couldn't recognize. Aaron was speaking to the shopkeeper. I need a full set of first-year textbooks for Hogwarts. Could you gather them all for me? Anne wandered through the shop by herself. Before they entered, she had mentioned wanting to buy extra books to read on her own. Aaron had happily agreed and praised her as her mother's daughter. Sonia had always been top of her class. Running her fingers across the spines of thick and thin volumes alike, Anne was reminded of those romantic scenes in dramas and movies, where the male and female leads fall in love at first sight in a library. She chuckled to herself at the thought and pulled a hefty book from the shelf. No one on the other side reached for the same one. Oh well. She murmured with a small smile, looking at the title, A Modern History of Magic. No wonder it was so thick, it was a history book. A hand tapped her on the shoulder, gently patting twice. A girl's voice, slightly nervous, asked, "Excuse me, could I have a look at the book you're holding?" Anne turned to see a girl just a little taller than herself with a head of bushy brown hair. She smiled a bit shyly at her. "Oh, of course. Here you go," Anne said, handing over the heavy book. "Thanks." The girl immediately began flipping through it. Anne noticed her large front teeth as she spoke and wondered if the girl might get braces someday. Do wizards even have dentists? She recalled that the heroine in the Harry Potter movies had Muggle parents who were dentists. Anne moved to another shelf, scanning titles. By the time she left the shop, she'd not only gotten the required books but also picked up extras like an introduction to Eastern wizardry, 100 magical herbs for cooking, and Gringotts, a history of the Wizarding Bank, 5 or 6 in total. She cast a slightly regretful glance back at the bookstore. She had really wanted a massive tome called the Herbology Encyclopedia, easily over 1,000 pages, but Aaron had gently pointed out that the trunk already held 13 books and likely couldn't fit more. As they were preparing to head home, Anne remembered she couldn't bring the magical trunk back to the orphanage. Wanting to keep her books close, they turned back and bought her a new enchanted shoulder bag with the same extension charm. Sitting in the front seat of the car, Anne curiously flipped her new bag inside out, pulling the books out and putting them back in again. This is amazing. The thickness doesn't change at all, but it gets heavier. Aaron laughed from the driver's seat, clearly enjoying her excitement. That's magic for you, Anne. After you get back, I probably won't see you again until September 1st, Hogwarts opening day. I'll get your train ticket and pick you up at 8 a.m. to take you to King's Cross Station. The train usually departs at 11. You will be good during this month, all right? Anne nodded, patting her bag. Of course. I'll use the time to learn as much as I can about the wizarding world. She was also thinking about how to explain her new school to Headmistress Odette. And Jill, she had to say goodbye to her too. Then another question popped into her mind. Uncle Aaron, does Hogwarts have holidays? Of course. Hogwarts goes on break for Christmas every year. During that time, you can either stay at school or go home. Actually, according to magical law, I'm officially your guardian now. So, Aaron turned to her, would you like to live with me? Anne's eyes lit up. A wizard's house? What would that be like? Of course I would. But Aaron quickly added with some embarrassment, not yet, though. You see, I'm only recognized as your guardian in the magical world. It'll take at least 2 months to sort things out with the Muggle authorities. He sighed. Besides, I travel constantly for work, and my place, well, let's just say it's not exactly fit for a young girl right now. But by Christmas, yes, by then, I'll have it sorted. I might even hire a house elf. Anne suddenly asked, so? Uncle Aaron, are you still single? Yeah. Aaron realized what he had just admitted and turned red. Ahem. Let's move on. Hogwarts has 4 houses, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff. Anne chuckled to herself. When Aaron said he traveled a lot, she already understood. His confession only confirmed it. A bachelor's home was hardly the ideal place for a child, it seemed even wizards weren't so different from ordinary Muggle men. Aaron went on to explain the sorting ceremony, the houses, and other first-day matters until they finally arrived at the orphanage. Seeing no one around, Aaron quickly got out and opened Anne's door, reminding her once again to stay safe and right if anything happened. Then he drove off. Anne nodded along to his many reminders and, after his car disappeared from view, wandered around a bit before re-entering the orphanage. As she passed the mailbox, she suddenly remembered, Momo, the owl they had bought, was still in Aaron's car. He probably won't realize it until tomorrow morning, she muttered to herself. After dinner, Anne returned to her room, sat down, and was about to open a book when she heard tapping at her window. She opened it, and a tiny, fully black fluff ball flew straight into her. She caught it gently with both hands. It's you? Momo. The owl had a letter and a small pouch tied to its leg. She took them off. The letter was from Aaron, apologizing and giving her an address. She poured some owl treats into her hand from the pouch and fed Momo. Then, she opened her book and began reading. After everything these past few days, the wizarding world no longer felt like just a name or image from fiction. It was real, a world as complex, lively, and three-dimensional as the Muggle one. A world full of people. Of fascinating people. In the days that followed, Anne stayed at the orphanage, leisurely reading and occasionally worrying about how to explain that she wouldn't be attending St. Edmund's School. She wrote to Aaron about it, and he assured her not to worry. A few days later, Anne received a letter from the school. After reading it, she realized Aaron had come up with a rather wicked plan. Headmistress Odette, still hung up on the St. Edmund's School, kept bringing it up, and it began to frustrate Anne. If she didn't stop her soon, the whole orphanage might find out, and then it'd be even harder to explain. So one afternoon, Anne put on a sad expression and said to the headmistress, "Mrs. Odette, you know I got accepted to 2 schools. I may not be going to Cofield after all. They cancelled my scholarship." She handed over Aaron's forged letter. "Oh, how could they? But you passed their entrance exam." "Yes, ma'am. But they admitted a local London student who could pay full tuition. They said they were sorry. But the other school offered me a full scholarship." "Oh, my poor girl," Headmistress Odette said, pulling her into a hug. After that conversation, Anne assumed the problem was solved. Despite thinking it was a sneaky trick, the outcome was good. Odette never brought it up again. At least, Anne believed so. One early summer morning, Anne and 3 older orphans, Abelard, Gage, and Gavin, led a group of younger kids to help out at the farm next door. It was a monthly activity where the older kids guided the younger ones in chores like collecting hay and watering vegetables. While Anne and Gage were showing 3 kids how to stack hay, someone called out her name from afar. "Anne, I see you. I'm here." It was Jill, Anne's childhood friend. Her family owned a large dairy farm that supplied milk to the orphanage and many London families. Anne excused herself and walked over. "What is it?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. She noticed Jill holding a colorful plastic cat-shaped container. Jill grabbed Anne's hand and pulled her into the shade. Her expression was serious. "I found out." Anne's heart skipped a beat. "Found out what?" "That you're hiding something from me," Jill pouted. "Humph, never mind. Here, this is for you." She shoved the container into Anne's hands. Anne took a closer look. It was a piggy bank. "Why are you giving me this?" It was heavy, full of coins. "I overheard Mrs. Odette talking to Mrs. Adeline while delivering milk yesterday. She said you're not going to Cofield, but to another school." Anne cursed inwardly. She knew it was a bad idea. How could wizards understand how prestigious that school was to the Muggle community? "I don't have much," Jill bit her lip. "This is all I've saved, about £60. I don't know if it's enough, but Anne, there's always a way. You should go to a good school." Anne looked away from Jill's pure, resolute eyes. She wanted to tell her everything, but she remembered what Aaron had said, the wizarding world must stay hidden from Muggles. If they found out, the Ministry would surely step in, and who knew how harshly. Instead, she gave Jill a reassuring smile. "Do you trust me?" Jill thought about it, then nodded. "Of course. Then I promise, the school I'm going to is way better than Cofield. It's one of the best in the world." "But..." Mrs. Odette said it was some unknown school. "Jill." Anne looked her in the eyes. "All right. I believe you. Is your school a boarding school too?" Jill asked. "My dad enrolled me in one in London. He said it's a good one, strict rules and all." Her voice turned a bit wistful. "They won't let us wear cute skirts, only uniforms." Then she perked up again. "But when my dad took me there to deliver milk, I saw the campus. It's huge. They have a big fountain in front of the main building." As Jill chattered excitedly about what she saw in the city and at school, Anne was truly happy for her. But eventually, she had to interrupt. There was still work to do. Before they parted, Anne returned the piggy bank. Jill reluctantly took it back only because Anne insisted. They made plans to meet again soon. Jill had invited Anne to join her on a milk delivery trip to London. And they finally met. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 6, On the Train. September 1st, 10:30 a.m. King's Cross Station. Aaron lugged the trunk while Anne carried the owl cage. The two of them walked toward the space between platforms 9 and 10. People bustled around the station, coming and going. They'd have to wait until the crowd thinned before slipping through the stone wall into platform 9 3/4, just to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention from the muggles. Aaron reached out and ruffled Anne's hair again. Ever since that time in Diagon Alley, he'd gotten a bit addicted to doing it. Her hair was soft and smooth, jet black and gleaming. Every time he tousled it, her little face would scrunch up in mild protest, but it was the kind of anger that made people want to tease her more. Maybe it was because she was shorter than most kids her age, Aaron thought. With her small nose, delicate mouth, and cool, distant expression, Anne always looked like a little lady too grown up for her age. And yet she was incredibly polite when she spoke, which only added to the contrast. The crowd gradually began to thin. Aaron set the owl cage on top of the trunk and reached for her hand. With one hand gripping hers and the other pushing the luggage, he said, "Hold tight, Anne. It's time." As they passed through the wall, a huge steam engine came into view, hissing and puffing white clouds. The platform was packed with families and students. The sharp hoots of owls and the rumble of trunks being dragged mixed with the cheerful noise of chatter. Anne blinked. So many people. It reminded her of holiday travel rushes in her past life. Being short, she had to hold tightly onto Aaron's hand just to avoid being swallowed by the crowd. Aaron didn't stop until they were near the very last carriage. The front and middle compartments are always full. "We'll have better luck at the back," he said loudly over the noise. Sure enough, the back was quieter. Aaron helped Anne onto the last carriage. It was still empty. He opened a sliding compartment door and hoisted her trunk onto the luggage rack. "It's heavy, but don't worry. When we get to school, someone will take it to your dorm for you." Then he turned to her seriously. "Anne, I'll have to get off soon. Here." He pulled out a handful of coins, gold galleons and silver sickles, and pressed them into her hand. "This is your allowance. Buy whatever you like." He paused, a faint crease between his brows. "And listen. If anyone gives you a hard time at school, tell me. I'll make sure they regret it." Then, remembering how mature Anne always sounded, he chuckled. "Of course, if you're the one doing the bullying, that's fine too. I'll still have your back." Anne made a face. "I think I'd rather focus on my studies." More students were boarding now, and the platform noise outside was swelling. The train let out a loud whistle. "All right, really going now. Don't forget to write to me, Momo will find me, no matter where I am." Aaron reached out to ruffle her hair again, but Anne ducked away just in time. "That's how you stunt someone's growth," she protested. She didn't understand why people kept treating her like a kid, first Jill, now Aaron. Physical resistance never worked, so she had to resort to logic. Aaron laughed and pulled his hand back reluctantly. All right. Just don't forget to write." After getting her nod of agreement, he stepped out of the compartment and off the train. The moment he did, the train began to move. People on the platform waved as it pulled away. Anne sat quietly, watching the countryside begin to roll by. She idly spun a silver sickle between her fingers, the green fields of England slipping past the window. The door slid open. A boy with messy black hair and striking green eyes peeked in. "Hi, is this seat taken?" he asked, pointing to the spot across from her. Anne shook her head and went back to spinning her coin. The boy placed his luggage down and sat opposite her. "Hi. Are you starting your first year at Hogwarts too?" She nodded politely. "Yes." "Hello." He looked relieved at her reply. "You look a lot younger than the rest of us." When Anne glanced up at him, he backpedaled. "I didn't mean that in a bad way or anything." "It's fine," she said simply. "Honestly, it's not even worth a reaction." The boy clearly had a fragile ego. "You're not the first to say that." "I'm Anne." Anne Reeve. She gave him a faint, practiced smile. I'm Harry Potter, he replied, returning the smile. Anne raised an eyebrow. Already meeting the protagonist? That's fast. Harry Potter? Oh. Harry braced himself, expecting her to ask about the scar, but Anne said nothing. No staring, no questions. That was refreshing. So, Harry ventured, do you know anything about Hogwarts? I don't really know anything about the wizarding world. I grew up with muggles, actually. Anne gave him a thoughtful look. He's more timid than I imagined. A far cry from the stories people tell. She answered evenly, I know a little. Hogwarts has 4 houses. Before she could finish, the door slid open again. A tall, lanky red-haired boy stood there, freckles all over his face. Hey, sorry, do you mind if I sit here? All the other compartments are full. Harry nodded, recognizing him from the station. He looked toward Anne, who also nodded. The red-haired boy grinned and shoved his trunk into place before plopping down next to Harry. I'm Ron Weasley. You're really Harry Potter? Harry nodded again. Ron leaned closer. Do you really have, you know? Harry pushed his hair up, revealing the lightning-shaped scar. Whoa, the you-know-who mark. Do you remember anything? Like what he looked like? Harry shook his head. No. Just, a lot of green light. He glanced again at Anne. She had paused her coin trick and was quietly watching them. Ron suddenly remembered she was there and looked sheepish. Oh, sorry. I got a bit too excited. He's Harry Potter, after all. Anne gave a polite nod. I understand. I'm Anne Reeve. Nice to meet you, Ron. Maybe realizing he'd been rude, Ron turned to Anne. What were you two talking about earlier? I heard you mention Hogwarts. Oh, I was asking Anne about it, Harry explained. She said there are 4 houses. Anne tucked away her coin and looked at Ron. I believe the Weasley family is quite established in the wizarding world. You must know a lot more than we do. Yeah, I saw your brothers on the platform, Harry added. They go to Hogwarts, right? Ron turned pink. Yeah, but we're not really some famous family or anything. There's just a lot of us. The 2 boys chatted about their families. Anne listened quietly, occasionally adding a comment or two. At around 12:30, a woman pushing a trolley full of treats stopped by their door. Anything off the trolley, dears? Anne, long curious about wizarding sweets, bought a generous pile. Harry, clearly starving, did the same. Their table was soon piled with treats. Ron blushed and pulled out a slightly crushed paper package containing 2 sandwiches. Harry held up a pumpkin pasty. Want to trade? Ron shook his head. You really wouldn't want this. It's dry. Anne picked up a box of chocolate frogs, trying to figure out how to open it. Listening to the boys talk, she passed it to Ron. Could you help? I've never opened one of these before. Then she gestured to the table full of snacks. I can't finish all this myself. If you tell us what's interesting about them, I'd love to share. Just think of it as a fair trade. She turned to Harry with a faint smile. And I'm sure Harry, who also grew up in the Muggle world, would be happy to share too, right? The boys blinked at her. Then Harry nodded. Yeah, of course. He paused, then said, I thought you were from a wizarding family, Ron finished. I'm half-blood, Anne said. But I've lived with Muggles all my life. She lifted her unopened frog box. Harry did the same, both of them now looking to Ron. Flustered by their attention, Ron's face turned the same shade as his hair. He took the box and demonstrated. Right, so, open it this way, or the frog might jump. Inside, there's a card of a famous witch or wizard. He showed them a card. Ah, Dumbledore again. I've already got 3. He handed it to Anne. Harry opened his own. Merlin. I got Merlin. As Ron continued explaining the sweets, Anne found herself genuinely impressed by the creativity behind wizard candy. She tried Bertie Bott's every flavor bean and got one that tasted like walnut and chocolate. Just as Harry was about to try a suspicious grey one, the door opened again. A round-faced boy and a girl in brand-new Hogwarts robes stood outside. Sorry, have you seen a toad? The boy asked, nearly in tears. The girl raised her chin. Neville lost his toad. Did you see it? Harry and Ron shook their heads. Anne recognized the girl from Flourish and Blots. The girl turned to leave but spotted Anne. She stepped in and sat beside her. Hey! I'm Hermione Granger. We met at the bookstore. I forgot to ask your name then. Thank you for letting me have that last copy of A History of Modern Magic. Are you a first year too? I thought you weren't. You look a bit small. Harry and Ron blinked. Hermione knows her? Anne was briefly startled but recovered quickly. It's fine. I'm Anne Reeve. Nice to meet you. Hermione nodded, clearly pleased with the answer. Then she turned to the boys. And you are? Ron Weasley. Ron mumbled. Harry Potter, Harry said. Really? Hermione looked at Harry in awe. I've read about you. You're in A History of Modern Magic, The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, and Great Wizarding Events of the 20th Century. Harry gaped. I'm in books. Hermione looked scandalized. You didn't know? If it were me, I'd have looked up every book I was mentioned in. Anyway, just so you know, we'll be arriving soon. You should get changed. I'm off to help Neville find his toad. She turned to leave with Neville, then gave Anne one last glance, and a smile that lingered just a bit too long. Anne blinked, watching her go. That smile felt different. Anne's gaze lingered on the door for a moment longer than necessary. Ron and Harry returned to their Quidditch discussion. But Anne, her thoughts had taken a new turn entirely. She'd met Hermione Granger before. And now she wondered when she'd see her again. A/N, if you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 7, Hogwarts. The train began to slow down and eventually came to a complete stop. The students jostled their way to the doors, pouring out onto a small, dark platform. The night air was cold enough to make Anne shiver. A lantern bobbed over the crowd of first years, and Harry heard a familiar voice calling out. First years. First years over here. Harry. There you are, yeah, all right. In the sea of people, Hagrid stood out clearly, not only because of his towering height but also because of the lantern he was holding, which became an instant beacon for the first years. Come on now, follow me. Any more first years? Watch your step, this way. Hagrid called out loudly. They stumbled after him down a steep, narrow path. Dense darkness loomed on either side. Anne figured the path must be flanked by thick forest. No one spoke along the way, only Neville's occasional sniffles broke the silence. Round this bend and you'll get your first look at Hogwarts. Hagrid shouted back. Then, as if on cue, a loud howl echoed through the night, a woo. At the end of the path, a vast black lake suddenly opened up before them. Across the water, high on a cliff, stood the towering silhouette of the Hogwarts castle, its many turrets and towers gleaming under the starlit sky, windows glowing like fireflies. Anne narrowed her eyes at the view. It really is like something out of a fairy tale. No more than 4 to a boat. Hagrid shouted, pointing at the small boats docked at the lake's edge. Anne stepped into the nearest boat. Hermione followed right after her, and then Ron and Harry clambered in as well. Sitting in the boat, the three of them kept sneaking curious glances at Anne. She ignored the three nosy boys, turning her attention to the inky surface of the lake. Wasn't there something about mer people living here? And other magical aquatic creatures too? What do merfolk even look like? Like Disney's mermaids? Or are they hideous? Do they sleep like regular people? The fleet of boats began moving, guided silently toward the towering cliffs. Anne looked up at the castle that now seemed to loom directly above her. Heads down! Hagrid called out as they approached an ivy-draped archway. They ducked and passed beneath it, entering a hidden cavern that opened up into a wide underground landing. So there's a secret entrance underneath the castle too, Anne mused. The boats came to a stop at a rocky dock. Everyone disembarked and began ascending a stone staircase. Anne was among the last to get off. Just as she stepped onto the dock, she caught sight of Hagrid retrieving a small dark object from one of the empty boats and handing it to Neville, his missing toad. Neville's grin was so wide his eyes turned into little crescents. The three students behind Anne saw it too. They followed the group through a tunnel carved into the rock. When they emerged back into the night, they stood on a flat grassy hill before the grand castle. Anne tilted her head back to gaze at it. So this is Hogwarts, the place I'll be living for the next 7 years. The gateway to the magical world. Hagrid led them up a flight of stone steps and stopped before an enormous oak door. After making sure no one was missing, he raised a massive fist and knocked 3 times. The door swung open instantly. Standing in the doorway was a tall witch in emerald green robes. Her expression was stern, her black hair neatly pulled back. Anne recognized her immediately. That must be Professor McGonagall. Sure enough, Hagrid said, first years, Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall led them into the entrance hall, across a stone-flagged floor, and into a small chamber at the far end. Anne trailed behind the group, and behind her were the 3 boys, Ron, Harry, and an increasingly fidgety Neville. Welcome to Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall said from the front of the room. The start of term feast will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you must first be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony, as your house will be like your family during your time at Hogwarts. The 4 houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history and has produced outstanding witches and wizards. She began pacing slowly as she continued, your triumphs at Hogwarts will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will bring glory to your house. She paused, surveying the nervous faces. Now, I suggest you straighten yourselves up while you wait. I'll return when the Great Hall is ready. With that, she swept from the room. The moment she left, the atmosphere shifted completely. Nervous silence turned into buzzing chatter. How do you think they'll sort us? Harry was trying in vain to flatten his messy hair. Ron was fiddling with his worn robes. Fred told me it's some sort of terrifying test. Fred's my brother, he's in Gryffindor. But I think he was joking. His voice trailed off uncertainly. At the word test, Harry visibly flinched. Meanwhile, Hermione was muttering under her breath, rapidly reciting every spell she'd memorized. Anne, calm as ever, pulled out a bronze nut and flipped it across her fingers. You're not nervous at all? Hermione asked suddenly. Ron and Harry both turned to look at Anne. Well. Anne tapped her chin thoughtfully. It's just a hat. What's there to be afraid of? But then she glanced at Malfoy's tense face and reconsidered. Wait, could the sorting hat be some kind of unspoken Hogwarts tradition you're not supposed to talk about? Since no one's saying anything, maybe I shouldn't either. I didn't come here to stand out. Let the main characters take the spotlight. She gestured around at the group. Look, most of the students here are Muggleborns or grew up in the Muggle world. If they were given some kind of harsh test on their first day, half the kids wouldn't even make it through. I think Hogwarts must have some sort of magical method of assigning houses. Quiet and mysterious, not dramatic. The trio nodded slowly, finding her reasoning sound. Suddenly, someone shrieked. 20 or so ghosts glided through one of the walls, shimmering white and translucent, floating around the room and startling half the first years. Anne stared, wide-eyed and utterly fascinated. So ghosts are real? What were these people like when they were alive? How does one become a ghost? Do you have to be powerful? Wait, wasn't Moaning Myrtle just a student? She counted quickly, there weren't many. Are these the only ghosts Hogwarts has gathered over the centuries? Or is it that only certain deaths within the castle leave ghosts behind? A sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. Form a line. The sorting ceremony is about to begin. Professor McGonagall stood at the doorway again. Anne fell in step with the others. They exited the chamber, crossed the entrance hall, and walked through a pair of massive doors into the great hall. Anne's breath caught. Floating candles shimmered in the air. 4 long tables gleamed with golden plates and goblets. Above them, the enchanted ceiling reflected the starry sky. Hermione leaned closer and whispered, "The ceiling's enchanted. It mimics the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." The Sorting Hat soon began to sing. After its song ended, a collective sigh of relief spread through the new students. Hermione, Ron, and Harry all glanced at Anne. "I didn't tell you anything," she thought, a bit confused by their grateful expressions. But she quickly forgot about it as Professor McGonagall began calling out names. "Which house will I be sorted into?" Anne wondered. "Gryffindor? No way, too close to the protagonists. I'm here to explore the magical world, not get swept into their chaos. I want to return to China one day and build something in the real world. Their adventures? I'd rather not die trying." "Hufflepuff? That sounds peaceful. But you probably need to be loyal and hardworking." "Loyal, maybe. Hardworking? Definitely not." "Ravenclaw? That's Mum's old house. Wit and intelligence? As a full-grown adult among 11-year-olds, I should qualify. Definitely a possibility." "Slytherin? That was Dad's house. They value cunning and self-preservation. Not bad traits, really. But, being in the same house as Malfoy?" While she was still mentally weighing her options, she heard her name called. "Anne Reeve." "Already?" She walked up to the stool and barely placed the hat on her head when it shouted. "Slytherin." Anne blinked. "That was fast. I didn't even get to tell it my preferences. Didn't the main character have a whole conversation with this thing?" Still processing, she walked automatically toward the Slytherin table. She didn't notice the brief glance Dumbledore and Snape exchanged at the staff table. Nor did she see the disappointed looks Ron and Hermione gave her from the Gryffindor table. Several Slytherins clapped as she approached. Older students quickly made space for her. Anne nodded politely in thanks and took a seat beside another new girl. "Hi," the girl beamed. "I'm Fanny Charles. Looks like we're housemates now." Fanny had all the features of a classic English rose, golden hair, high nose bridge. She reminded Anne a little of Jill, except prettier. And more refined. Probably from a noble family, Anne guessed. "Nice to meet you," Anne said, smiling. "I'm Anne Reeve." They'd just finished introducing themselves when the great hall erupted into whispers. All eyes had turned to the boy standing in front of Professor McGonagall. "Harry Potter." The buzz grew louder as the Sorting Hat deliberated. Fanny shot Anne an apologetic look before turning her attention to Harry as well. When the Hat finally shouted Gryffindor, the hall burst into cheers. The ceremony continued after that. Once the last student was sorted, Dumbledore rose from his seat and spread his arms. "Welcome. Welcome to another year at Hogwarts. I have only a few words to say. Let the feast begin. With a flick of his wand, food appeared on the golden plates before them. Roast beef, chicken, pork chops, steak, sausages, boiled potatoes, roasted potatoes, chips, carrots. Anne scanned the table and sighed a little. The table's full, but the variety is so limited. It's just the same ingredients in different forms, boiled, roasted, fried. Compared to the plain meals at the orphanage, it was still a big improvement. But she'd secretly been hoping for something extraordinary from the magical world. Guess I'll just have to cook for myself eventually, she thought, remembering the book she bought, 100 Delicious Magical Herbs and How to Cook Them. She took a bit of everything and kept eating while discreetly observing her surroundings. Fanny was slicing her steak with elegant precision, while Malfoy sat between Crabbe and Goyle, glaring toward the Gryffindor table. After the meal, Dumbledore reminded everyone to stay out of the Forbidden Forest and warned them about a dangerous room on the 4th floor. Then he dismissed them to their dormitories. The Slytherin prefect led them through a dim corridor and down into the dungeons beneath the lake. The Slytherin common room was breathtaking, walls of dark Gothic marble, a semi-transparent domed ceiling carved from crystal, flickering green lanterns hanging from chains, and a fireplace carved with elaborate stonework. Anne gave it a solid 80 points. Then a giant squid glided past the ceiling above. Okay, 90. Now if I see a mermaid, I'll give it 100. In the girls' dormitory, Anne discovered that this year's Slytherin girl count was low. Just 5 girls, exactly filling one room. I guess Slytherin doesn't get many new students each year, she thought. Hufflepuff seemed the most crowded earlier. Exhausted, Anne flopped onto the bed next to her trunk. After a gentle reminder from Fanny, she got up to change into pajamas, then exchanged brief introductions with her roommates before slipping into sleep. A/N, I decided to add a new character to the story. Her background isn't simple. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 8, The First Lesson. Fanny, what class do we have next? Anne asked as she casually spun a nut in her fingers while walking beside Fanny. Fanny pulled a neatly folded sheet of parchment from the book she was holding. The handwriting on it was graceful and tidy. History of Magic. We'll be with Gryffindor, Fanny replied. History of Magic? Looks like we're in for a bit of a show. What show? Fanny asked, puzzled. You'll see soon enough, Anne said mysteriously. When they arrived at the classroom, it was still empty. Fanny made her way to the first row, while Anne plopped down into a seat near the back. Fanny turned to her, a little hesitant. Anne, why aren't you sitting up front? Anne continued spinning the coin on the desk. Fanny, I'd advise against sitting in the first row. My uncle told me that history of magic is the most boring class at Hogwarts. I believe him. Fanny flipped through the book in her hand and muttered, but I think it sounds interesting. Still, she ended up sitting beside Anne. After a while, she looked at the empty rows in front of them and suggested, Anne, how about we move up just one row? Just one. Anne shrugged and pocketed the coin. Sure, it doesn't matter to me. Just as they stood up, the door burst open. Hermione stood at the entrance, panting heavily. Anne and Fanny turned to look. Anne. Hermione blinked in surprise. You're already here? Merlin, Hogwarts has got to be the most confusing school ever. Stairs that move, doors that don't open the same way. Yesterday during class, a staircase shifted and I nearly missed it. Fanny nodded in agreement. She was incredibly grateful she had followed Anne to class the day before. Over half of Slytherin had been late. Some even looked like they'd been in a brawl, with their robes filthy and wrinkled. I just looked at the map, Anne replied matter-of-factly. Map? Hogwarts has a map. Hermione and Fanny asked one after the other. You didn't know? I had no idea Hogwarts even had one. If it did, my parents would have told me for sure, Fanny added. I've never read anything about it in Hogwarts, a history, Hermione chimed in. Well, my uncle gave me a copy before school started. I thought everyone got one. Anne began to feel a little uneasy. Had she just stumbled into something big? Was her map a unique copy? But that couldn't be, hadn't Harry been given the Marauder's map at some point? That was way more advanced. Anne had always assumed the one Aaron gave her was just a simpler version. Avoiding their questioning gazes, Anne mumbled, just, don't tell anyone else about it, okay? Both girls nodded. Hermione, however, stared at Anne, practically burning with curiosity. Seeing no way out, Anne pulled the old parchment from her bag and handed it over. You can take a look, but don't let anyone else see. Hermione didn't take it right away, though her eyes were glued to the map. Maybe I shouldn't. What if you're late to class next time? Your eyes say otherwise, Anne thought. But she needed to keep Hermione quiet. I've looked it over so many times I already memorized it. With that assurance, Hermione eagerly took the map. I'll give it back as soon as I finish. At that moment, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Hermione quickly tucked the map into her bag and hurried to the front row. A group of Gryffindor students entered the classroom. Fanny, sitting beside Anne, whispered curiously, "Who is she? And how do you know a Gryffindor? Slytherins and Gryffindors don't exactly get along." And, she stopped herself, remembering the need for secrecy, and just looked at Anne with her bright blue eyes. That's Hermione Granger. I ran into her at Flourish and Blotts before term started, and again on the train. So we knew each other before the sorting. Anne lowered her voice and added, "About the map, I'll explain later." Fanny understood and nodded, whispering back, "No worries. I'll just stick with you for classes anyway. We're in the same house and dorm. I'm just curious about how it." Anne sighed, "Honestly, I don't know. My uncle gave it to me offhandedly. I'll ask him about it and let you know." Satisfied, Fanny nodded and turned to her History of Magic textbook. The bell rang, though a few students were still missing. Professor Binns, the ghost, didn't care. He began lecturing in his usual flat and droning voice. The classroom filled with the soft scratching of quills. A while later, Harry and Ron came rushing into the room, the hems of their robes soaked. "Sorry, Professor," Harry called out. His voice echoed loud in the quiet room. "Look," came Malfoy's voice, loud and mocking. The famous Harry Potter. Late on his first History of Magic class. Ha ha ha. Late Potter. Laughter rippled through the room. Fanny blinked at Anne as if to say, "Is this the show you mentioned?" Not quite satisfied, Malfoy raised his voice again. "Late Potter. What happened to your robe? Did you fall in the loo?" More laughter broke out. Malfoy's goons joined in. "Fell in the loo. Ha ha ha. That's not true. We were ambushed by Peeves." Ron retorted angrily. By now, Professor Binns had floated up to the front and addressed the boys. "Find your seats," he said. Then, turning to Malfoy, he warned, "Mr. Malfoy, for disrupting class, Slytherin loses 1 point. If you don't quiet down, I'll be reporting this to Professor Snape." At the mention of Snape, Malfoy shrank back and glared at Harry, falling silent. By the third day, with no morning classes, Anne and Fanny stayed in the library. Anne sighed internally. She hadn't expected the Wizarding World's curriculum to be so demanding. Every class assigned homework. Even with her photographic memory cheat code, she still had to spend loads of time on assignments. Someone quietly sat down next to her. Anne glanced over, it was Hermione. With one hand, Hermione held a book, the other nudged a different book toward Anne. Anne looked at the title, Famous Wizards of the 20th Century. She gave Hermione a puzzled look. Hermione flipped through her own book and gestured for Anne to open the one in front of her. Inside was the old map, neatly tucked between the pages. Anne quickly slid it into her bag and whispered, "You finished it already?" Hermione nodded and whispered back, "I memorized it last night." "Thanks." Then she simply stood and walked away. Fanny, watching the exchange, looked a little miffed. She whispered to Anne, "She just left? She's not very nice. That's the second time I've seen her, and she still hasn't asked my name. No one's ever treated me like that before." Anne recalled Hermione's personality from the train and tried to comfort her. She said thank you. "I think that's a big step for her. And honestly, I bet she already knows your name." "You told her?" Fanny frowned. "When? You've been with me all morning." Anne pointed to her bag. "That map shows the whole castle. If she memorized that in one night, remembering names at the sorting wouldn't be hard." Fanny nodded solemnly, clearly impressed. "Wow! My parents always say people with talent deserve respect." 2 more days passed, and Anne had a decent understanding of the overall curriculum. Her favorite subject was herbology, taught by a short, plump witch named Professor Sprout. She often took them to the greenhouses behind the castle, where they learned to cultivate magical plants and fungi. The greenhouse housed tropical and subtropical flora, including many Anne had read about in 100 delicious magical plants for cooking. She found herself envious of Hufflepuff students. Professor Sprout was their head of house. Anne now spent all her free time volunteering in the greenhouse, hoping to earn some magical plants or seeds. She had already written to Uncle Aaron, asking him to buy her flower pots and common seeds. After all, there were no shops inside the school. Her least favorite classes were Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration and History of Magic. Transfiguration was simply too difficult, and Professor McGonagall was extremely strict. As for History of Magic, Professor Binns was as dull as a college lecturer who just read off PowerPoint slides. Friday morning, during breakfast. "Fanny, what classes do we have today?" Anne asked as she buttered her bread. Fanny swallowed her bite and took a sip of milk before answering. "Potions. With Professor Snape. And Gryffindor." Anne paused mid-bite. "Sounds like this'll be an interesting one." Then she took a bite of her toast. After she finished eating, the hall filled with the fluttering of wings as dozens of owls swooped in to deliver mail. The owls circled over the tables, dropping letters and parcels to their respective owners. On Tuesday, Anne had written to Aaron about her arrival at school. On Wednesday, she had sent another letter detailing what she needed for herbology. But there had been no reply. She figured he must have been traveling. Soon, Momo spotted her and swooped down to the Slytherin table. Anne untied the letter from Momo's leg and fed the owl bits of bread. She unfolded the parchment and read the slightly messy handwriting. "Dear Anne. Sorry for the late reply. I'm currently in Egypt. I heard you were sorted into Slytherin. Fantastic. I'm sure your parents would be thrilled too. I've already asked someone in Diagon Alley to buy the items you need. They should arrive in a couple of days. About the map, haha, I forgot to tell you. Yes, I bought it from an acquaintance. Go ahead and have fun with it. Hogwarts still has lots of secret passages to explore. Love. Uncle Aaron." Anne was speechless. "What do you mean, have fun with it?" It felt like Aaron just wanted chaos to erupt. Potions class was held in a dungeon-like room that felt even colder than the rest of the castle. Around the room were shelves lined with glass jars containing strange specimens suspended in fluid. The moment class began, Professor Snape took the roll. He paused when he reached Harry's name. "Oh, yes. Harry Potter," he said, looking directly at Harry. "Our new celebrity." At once, Malfoy and his lackeys, Crabbe and Goyle, burst into stifled giggles. Snape ignored them and finished roll call, then turned to address the class. "You have come here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," he said, voice barely above a whisper, yet every student heard each word clearly. Like Professor McGonagall, Snape had an effortless way of commanding silence. "As there will be no foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you to truly understand the beauty of a simmering cauldron, the soft sheen of vapor, the delicate power of liquids that can creep through human veins, bewitch the mind, and ensnare the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, and even stop death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." The class fell silent. Suddenly, Snape barked, "Potter! What do you get if you add powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry glanced helplessly at Ron, who looked just as blank. Hermione, seated up front, had her hand in the air immediately. "I don't know, sir," Harry admitted. Snape sneered. "Tisk, tisk, fame clearly isn't everything." Ignoring Hermione, he pressed on. "Let's try again. Potter, where would you look if I asked you to find me a bezoar?" Hermione stretched her arm as high as possible without leaving her seat. Harry still had no clue. He avoided looking at Malfoy and his cronies, who were silently shaking with laughter. "I don't know, sir. I suppose you didn't bother to open any of your textbooks before school, did you, Potter?" Harry said nothing. Fanny glanced at Anne, clearly confused. Why was their head of house being so harsh on Harry? Anne subtly shook her head. She knew Snape's motives. He resented Harry's father but loved his mother, so he harshly protected Harry. But none of that could be said aloud. "Then tell me, Potter, what's the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" Hermione practically leapt from her seat, her hand stretched to the ceiling. "I don't know," Harry muttered, "but I think Hermione does. Why not ask her?" "Sit down," Snape snapped. "I'll tell you. Asphodel and wormwood make a powerful sleeping draught, the draught of living death. A bezoar is a stone taken from a goat's stomach. It saves you from most poisons. Monkshood and wolfsbane are the same plant, also known as aconite. Now, why aren't you all writing this down?" Quills scratched across parchment as everyone scrambled to take notes. "Insubordination, Potter, Gryffindor loses 1 point." The class continued. Gryffindor didn't get any easier. Snape paired them off to brew a simple boil cure, and circled the classroom in his billowing black robes, critiquing everyone's work, everyone, that is, except Malfoy and Fanny. While he was showing off Malfoy's perfect technique for steaming horned slugs, Fanny noticed Neville was about to mess up and quickly stopped him. "You need to take the cauldron off the fire before adding the porcupine quills, otherwise it'll melt." Neville panicked, looked around, and locked eyes with Anne, who gave a small nod. "You should listen to her," she said. Neville hurriedly did as he was told. Snape clearly noticed the exchange. He walked over, giving Neville a scornful glance before turning to Anne and Fanny. "Miss Charles, I hope you can be just as prompt next time. For saving a dunderhead from disaster, Slytherin earns 1 point." Fanny looked nervously at Anne. Anne gave her a reassuring smile and a shrug. "If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 9, Flying Lessons. Saturday Slytherin Common Room. Malfoy jabbed a finger at a notice pinned on the wall and announced with great enthusiasm, "Look! Flying lessons start next Thursday. And we're with the Gryffindors. Finally time to show those losers what real flying looks like." He launched into a dramatic tale about how he'd been trained at home to fly with expert skill, how he soared freely through the sky, and even concluded his story with a harrowing dodge of a Muggle helicopter. Immediately, the first-year students from wizarding families began excitedly chattering about Quidditch. Anne, however, got up and left just as Malfoy was about to start his speech. She wasn't about to waste her time listening to an 11-year-old with an overinflated ego bragging. She made her way to Professor Sprout's greenhouse. Lately, she'd been spending all her free time there, and she'd recently discovered that Professor Sprout had quite the interest in magical foods as well. "Hey, Professor Sprout, good morning," Anne called out as she entered, spotting the professor tending to some plants. "Oh, Anne. Good morning. Not at the library today? Or with Fanny?" Professor Sprout greeted her with a cheerful smile. "Fanny's at the library doing research. The weather's so nice today, I figured I'd spend some time in nature instead. Are you working on the fogtooth leaves? Need a hand?" "Oh, Anne, you always surprise me. That's a fourth-year plant. Let me test you, do you know how to handle it?" Anne nodded. "Of course. First, you need to clamp the large leaves with a peachwood clip, then gently spray the roots with asphodel extract. Gloves are a must. After that, trim the protrusions from the smaller leaves. Do you even know about asphodel?" "Oh, Anne, I truly wish you were in Hufflepuff." "Professor, I've been thinking the same lately," Anne grinned. "But I do like Slytherin's common room. So I guess I'll just make the best of where I am." "Well, clever Anne, come on then. Talking is one thing, but let's see if you can put it into practice." Anne spent the whole morning among the plants in the greenhouse. By the time she arrived in the Great Hall for lunch, it was already bustling. At the Gryffindor table, Ron was loudly debating with Dean Thomas, a Muggle-born student, over whether football or Quidditch was better. Harry sat nearby, eating quietly, occasionally listening in. He hadn't seen a Quidditch match before and knew little about football either. Hermione had a book open in front of her, reading diligently as she nibbled on her bread. Neville, who had grown up in a wizarding family but had never touched a broom, craned his neck to see what Hermione was reading. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy was still boasting about his brave childhood flying escapades. The other house tables weren't much different. Quidditch was the buzzword of the day. As Anne passed by, the word seemed to echo in her ears from every direction. She sat down next to Fanny with a sigh. "Flying lessons aren't until Thursday. That means I have to endure 5 more days of this? Torture." Fanny calmly swallowed her bite of food before turning to her. "Anne, I thought you'd be the type to enjoy this kind of competition." "I could never be interested in something so childish and testosterone-fueled," Anne replied as she scooped up some mashed potatoes. "If we're talking about ball games, I prefer snooker." "Testosterone-fueled? I know snooker, but Anne, have you ever actually played it?" "Hormones, Fanny. Testosterone is a chemical in the human body. And snooker, well, of course not," Anne caught herself. She was supposed to be 11, after all. "I've just seen it on TV. Looks cool though, doesn't it?" Okay, but," Fanny looked like she had more questions. Anne cut her off. "Fanny, please don't ask me what hormones are, or why the human body produces them." "All right, then. Also, don't ask what book I read it in. Fanny, if you don't drink your milk soon, it'll go cold." Anne pointed at Fanny's untouched cup. Fanny gave her a slightly hurt look but didn't press further. She picked up her milk. Wednesday afternoon. After herbology class. With no classes for the rest of the day, Anne and Fanny headed to the library to finish their astronomy, history of magic, and transfiguration homework. "Let's at least finish one subject today," Anne thought. They had only just begun when Anne came across a question that required further research. "Ugh, so annoying," she muttered, getting up and heading for the second floor of the library. She already knew exactly where to go. On her first visit, she had memorized the layout, what subjects were on which floors, which shelves held what. She found the astronomy section easily, grabbed 2 books, and was on her way back down when a familiar silhouette caught her eye. She paused. That back looked very familiar, and it had disappeared into the Quidditch section. Hogwarts doesn't have many people I recognize, and at this time of day in the library, it has to be Hermione. She was still reading about Quidditch? Since Saturday? That was such a waste of time. Athletic ability was mostly based on talent. Books couldn't help you much with that. Feeling a rare sense of responsibility to guide her peers toward better study habits, Anne walked over. "What are you reading?" The sudden voice startled Hermione, but once she saw it was Anne, she quickly relaxed. She silently turned the book so Anne could read the title, Quidditch Through the Ages. "Hermione," Anne began, "sports rely heavily on talent. Sure, books can help you a bit, but with Quidditch, honestly, you're just wasting time." Hermione's brows furrowed. Her voice rose with frustration. "You're here to mock me too? I didn't grow up on a broom like the rest of you wizard kids. These pointless books are the only way I can learn about Quidditch. Okay, trying to help people sometimes comes with the risk of being misunderstood." Anne sighed. "Let me explain. My parents were both wizards, yes, but only my mother was pure blood. They died when I was young. I was sent to an orphanage when I was 8. Until I got my Hogwarts letter, I knew as much about the wizarding world as you do." Hermione's expression shifted to surprise. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. "I'm just saying, you've been reading about Quidditch since Saturday. I'm sure by now you've memorized everything about broomsticks. But sports aren't like potions or spells. Take swimming, for example. Reading 10 books about it won't teach you what 1 hour in a pool can. These books are fine for passing the time, but don't invest so much energy into them." Hermione flushed and mumbled, "I just don't want to fall behind. I want to prove I'm not worse than anyone else." Such a stubborn child, Anne thought. But it was understandable. "All right, time to play big sister again. Hermione, let's say you don't do well in flying class tomorrow. So what? That doesn't mean anything. Everyone has different strengths. I'm great at herbology, but I'm terrible at transfiguration. You might not be great on a broomstick, but you're amazing in class. And besides, flying gets easier with practice. The others have been training for years, so what if they're better? There's no shame in that. Oh, and by the way, flying class doesn't count toward grades." Anne finished with a dry throat. "Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. If you want to keep reading about Quidditch, be my guest. Bye." She walked away, leaving Hermione staring after her. Thursday. Flying class. It was a clear day, with a gentle breeze. Anne, Fanny, and the 3 other girls from their dormitory walked together, unusual, since the Slytherin boys had already bolted out of the Great Hall straight to the front lawn where class would be held. "They act like getting there first means they'll get to fly first," muttered Pansy Parkinson, a short girl with dark brown hair who liked to hang around Malfoy. Anne silently agreed. When they arrived, only the Slytherins were there. Their class had 15 students, 5 girls and 10 boys. 35 broomsticks lay on the ground. Malfoy was holding one and looking disgusted. "This thing's worse than the broom we use at home to sweep the floors. Can this even fly?" His friends all chimed in, agreeing loudly. Soon the Gryffindors arrived, followed by their flying instructor, Madame Hooch. She had short, grey hair and piercing yellow eyes like an eagle's. "Well, what are you waiting for?" she barked. "Everyone stand next to a broom. Hurry up." Anne looked down at her broom. It was old and worn, its twigs sticking out at odd angles. For once, she found herself agreeing with Malfoy. "Stick out your right hand, over your broom, and say, 'Up.'" Madame Hooch instructed. "Up," everyone shouted. To Anne's surprise, her broom jumped straight into her hand. Only a few others had similar success, Malfoy and Harry among them. Hermione's broom rolled over a bit. Neville's didn't budge at all. Once everyone had a broom in hand, Madame Hooch demonstrated how to mount it properly and hovered through the rows correcting their grips. She pointed out errors for every single student. "All right. When I blow my whistle, you're going to kick off hard from the ground. Hold your broom steady, rise a few feet, lean forward slightly, and come straight back down. On my whistle. 3, 2. But Neville, too nervous to be left behind, kicked off early. "Come back down, boy!" Madame Hooch shouted. But it was too late. Neville soared into the air, clinging to his broom with terror in his eyes. Then he lost balance and fell with a thud onto the grass. His broom continued to climb higher and eventually vanished toward the Forbidden Forest. Madame Hooch rushed over. She looked almost as pale as Neville. "Broken wrist," Anne heard her mutter. "Come now, up you get." She helped Neville to his feet and turned to the rest of the class. "I'm taking him to the hospital wing. Nobody moves a muscle. Brooms on the ground, anyone so much as says Quidditch, and I'll have you out of Hogwarts before you can blink." No sooner had she left than Malfoy started cackling. "Did you see his face? That big oaf!" His goons laughed along. The Gryffindors glared daggers at him. Then Malfoy spotted something. He picked up a small white glass orb that had fallen where Neville crashed. It sparkled in the sunlight. "Look at this! That oaf Longbottom's gran sent him this thing." Harry stepped forward. "Give it here, Malfoy." Malfoy sneered, jumped onto his broom, and floated up. "Come get it, Potter. Maybe I'll leave it on a tree branch." Harry grabbed a broom. "No!" Hermione cried. Madame Hooch said, but Harry was already airborne. He flew smoothly, stopping right in front of Malfoy. The Gryffindors, except Hermione, cheered. Anne sighed, "What a bunch of impulsive kids." Still, the orb in Malfoy's hand looked familiar. She turned to Fanny. "Fanny, what's that thing Malfoy's holding?" Fanny glanced away from the sky. "It's Neville's remembrall. His gran sent it this morning. By the way, where were you? You missed breakfast." "I was at the greenhouse. My uncle's package arrived yesterday," Anne replied. But something about the orb looked different from hers. Ever since the map incident, she'd been extra cautious about anything Aaron gave her. "What does it do?" she asked. Fanny explained, "If you forget something, it turns red." So it wasn't the same after all. Anne was relieved. "Isn't there another orb like that, one that records past images? Like a Muggle camera?" "You mean a recall orb, right?" "Oh, I see." Anne nodded. While they chatted, Malfoy tossed the remembrall and Harry caught it just inches from the ground. Unfortunately, Professor McGonagall had seen the whole thing, and she was now marching toward the field at lightning speed. "Harry Potter!" she shouted. "In all my years at Hogwarts," then she marched him off. Malfoy and his cronies laughed triumphantly. "He's gonna be expelled for sure." Thanks to the two incidents, flying class ended early. But on the way back to the castle, Fanny frowned the whole way. Anne spun a nut in her fingers and glanced at the two Slytherin boys tailing them. She sighed and asked, "Fanny, what's wrong? Still thinking about earlier?" Fanny looked surprised that Anne had noticed, but nodded. "I know I shouldn't question Professor's decisions, but it was clearly Malfoy's fault, and yet Professor McGonagall." Anne didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, "Do you think Professor McGonagall is powerful? And what do you think of Harry?" Fanny hesitated, but answered honestly. "She's definitely powerful, head of Gryffindor, really skilled. And Harry? I don't know him well, but he doesn't seem like a bad person." Anne nodded. "Exactly. So do you think someone like Professor McGonagall only saw Harry misbehaving and not the whole picture? If you can tell Harry's not a bad kid, don't you think she can too? He's not going to be expelled. Fanny's eyes brightened. You're right. Anne glanced at the two boys who suddenly turned and walked faster. She muttered under her breath, might even turn out lucky for him. A/N, after watching Fantastic Beasts, I was struck again by how vast Rowling's magical world is. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 10, The Midnight Duel. In the Slytherin common room, Malfoy was loudly boasting about how he'd challenged Harry Potter to a midnight duel. Anne and Fanny had just returned from the library when Malfoy's two cronies stepped in to block Anne's way. Anne was a bit confused, she hadn't done anything to provoke this brat. She glanced at Malfoy, and Fanny, standing just behind her, also looked over in bewilderment. Well, look who's back, the traitor of Slytherin, Malfoy sneered, raising his chin. What? Anne replied blankly. Don't play dumb. This afternoon, didn't you say Professor McGonagall wouldn't expel Harry? Sounds to me like you're defending him. Planning to snitch on my plan, aren't you? That was me, Fanny started to speak. But Anne shook her head at her, stopping her with a slight smile. She wasn't worried, what could a bunch of first-year brats possibly do? Oh? You've got a plan? That's rich. I doubt you could come up with anything decent, Anne said mockingly. Malfoy shot her a glare, then, as if eager to show off, loudly outlined his brilliant scheme. He would lure Harry to the trophy room for a midnight duel, but instead of showing up, he'd tip off Filch. When he finished, he looked at Anne triumphantly. Wow! What a brilliant plan, Anne nodded with mock seriousness. Malfoy's chin lifted even higher. Don't even think about warning him, he growled. At his signal, Crabbe and Goyle stepped closer, trying to intimidate her. Fanny looked furious. If either of them dared lay a finger on Anne, she looked ready to step in. Anne glanced calmly around the common room. Plenty of people were watching the standoff. Well then, she said, turning to Malfoy. Since we've got an audience, let's make this official. A bet. Malfoy blinked. A bet. Tonight, I'll stay in the dorm and not leave. If anyone sees me step outside, I lose. But if your clever little plan fails, if Harry isn't expelled, you lose. And if you lose, you're not allowed to call me a traitor ever again. And you have to be my servant for a whole day, bring me tea, carry my books, and the works. A faint flush rose to Malfoy's already pale cheeks. What's wrong? Anne taunted. Scared? I thought you said it was a brilliant plan. All eyes turned to Malfoy. Even Crabbe and Goyle gave him sidelong glances. Malfoy straightened his neck and barked, Humph! Scared? Of course not. Fine. But what if you lose? If I lose? Anne smiled faintly. Then I'll be your servant for 3 days. Bring you tea, carry your books. Malfoy narrowed his eyes on her. Fine. You'll regret this, he said, and then turned to the common room. You all heard it. You're my witnesses. Anne gave a polite smile to the watching crowd. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your help. Then she tugged Fanny's hand and returned to the dorm. Once they were inside, Fanny rounded on her. Anne, how could you bet with him like that? It was me who asked you earlier. You should have let me explain, he wouldn't dare mess with me. Anne laughed out loud, surprising Fanny, who glared at her indignantly. While changing into her pajamas, Anne explained, It's okay, really. I know Malfoy wouldn't dare touch you, but think about it. Even if we cleared things up this time, he'd just call me a traitor again next time something came up. So I might as well settle it now. Best to put a brat in his place the first time they cause trouble, then they'll think twice before doing it again, right? She gave Fanny a playful wink. But Fanny hesitated. What if you lose? If I lose? Anne tilted her head thoughtfully. Well, that's impossible. Hey? Why? Because Harry's the main character, Anne thought. There's no way he's getting expelled. Might as well use this opportunity to teach Malfoy a little lesson. Well, she said solemnly, because Malfoy's a bad kid, and you're a good one, Fanny. And good always triumphs over evil, right? So the bad kid is bound to lose. Anne yawned. Anyway, I'm really sleepy. Time for bed. You should get some rest too. Night. She pulled the covers over herself and quickly drifted off to sleep. Fanny mumbled, You talk like you're not a kid yourself. And wait, how is this my problem? Well, maybe it is. The next morning, sunlight reflected off the lake and streamed into Anne's dorm. Anne rolled over and yanked the blanket over her head, trying to sleep in. But a minute later, a rather excited voice rang out, and someone pulled her covers back. Anne! Why are you still sleeping? Wake up! Fanny called beside her bed. Anne cracked open an eye and saw a crowd around her. Fanny stood on the left, looking thrilled. On the right, Pansy Parkinson stood with arms crossed, her expression unreadable. At the foot of the bed stood the other two girls from their dorm, staring at Anne with admiration. Anne rubbed her eyes and sat up, still groggy. What? Do we have class this morning? Fanny practically squealed with excitement as she hugged Anne tightly. Startled, Anne pushed her off. Fanny, please, remember your ladylike manners. Flustered, Fanny straightened up, but her excitement was too much to contain. Anne, you won. You should have seen Malfoy's face at breakfast when he saw Harry sitting there like nothing happened. He nearly started a fight, but Professor McGonagall stopped them. And somehow, don't ask me how, everyone found out about the bet. Now the entire year knows Malfoy has to be your servant for a day. Actually, it's not just our year, all of Hogwarts is talking about it. The girls at the foot of the bed nodded enthusiastically. Anne pieced together what must have happened and sighed. She hadn't meant for the story to spread. She really didn't want to become famous, especially not because of Malfoy. Wasn't his father on the Hogwarts board? Or even someone high-ranking in the ministry? She considered the consequences of actually making Malfoy act as her servant and shivered. Fanny, I've got a few questions. You need to answer them honestly. Sure. Fanny was still basking in admiration. You're from a noble family, right? Pretty high status. Fanny nodded, but before she could say anything, Pansy cut in with an eye roll. You didn't know that? There are hardly any families in Britain higher than hers. Anne ignored her and continued, in the wizarding world, are servants transferable? Like, if I have one and want to give them to someone else, can I? Fanny answered quickly, of course. Servants are considered property and can be given or reassigned. Good, Anne said, turning to Fanny. Then I'm officially transferring the one-day use of Malfoy's servant duties to you. Effective immediately. The room went quiet. Everyone stared at Anne in disbelief. After a pause, Fanny finally spoke. Anne, you. Don't be polite, Anne cut her off. The rights are yours now. She pulled the blanket back over her head and added, now everyone out, there's no class this morning. It's the perfect day to sleep in. I've been looking forward to this all week. But, what am I supposed to make Malfoy do? Fanny asked helplessly. Whatever you want, just don't wake me up. The four girls left the dorm. Fanny was already brainstorming. Pansy frowned. Why wouldn't she want Malfoy as her servant? Why make the bet at all? The other two girls looked to Fanny for answers. Fanny suddenly recalled what Anne had told her the night before. Maybe Anne hadn't expected this to go public and changed her mind at the last minute. And she hadn't even known about Fanny's family background. Fanny couldn't help smiling a little. At lunch, Anne strolled cheerfully into the great hall after a satisfying morning nap. The moment she appeared at the doorway, the whole hall fell silent, and dozens of eyes turned her way. Then, the whispering started, "That's her. Did you hear? Malfoy. The bet." Anne stiffened, her hand reflexively closing around the silver sickle in her robe pocket. As she walked, all eyes followed her, especially from the Gryffindor table. She kept her expression calm and sat beside Fanny. "They're just kids," she reminded herself. "Like a bunch of turnips gawking at me. Nothing to be nervous about." Still, she thought grimly, who the heck leaked it? Just then, Malfoy abruptly stood up and stormed out of the hall, Crabbe and Goyle following without a word. He didn't even glance at Anne. Anne raised an eyebrow and whispered, "You didn't make him do anything, did you?" Fanny shook her head. "Not at all. Every time he sees me, he just walks away. And..." She blinked innocently, "I don't think you ever planned to make him do anything in the first place." "Of course not," Anne said, sipping her cappuccino. "What kind of adult bullies an 11-year-old anyway?" With Malfoy gone, the atmosphere lightened. A few students came over to greet Anne. Harry and Ron made a point of stopping by. "Nice job, Anne," Ron said, like she'd gotten revenge for them. Even Hermione spoke to her, though less enthusiastically. "Anne, you know Malfoy's going to hate you now." Anne sighed. "I didn't think it'd turn out like this. But really, does anyone actually like him? So who cares?" She was a little worried. Fame brought trouble. The more well-known you became, the more problems found you. Fortunately, that worry only lasted a day, because it was quickly buried by even bigger news. Harry Potter had just become the youngest Quidditch player in a century. Figures, Anne thought. The main character is always the main character. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 11, Halloween. By the time Halloween arrived, Anne realized she had already been at Hogwarts for 2 months. On the eve of the holiday, a strong scent of pumpkin filled every corner of the school. But Hogwarts' first Halloween wasn't going to be a peaceful one. Professor Quirrell had likely already begun moving behind the scenes, and the main characters were about to experience a turning point in their friendship. Anne had no intention of getting involved. She told herself firmly, stay far, far away from the protagonists. Their adventures always involved danger and near-death experiences. They only survived each time thanks to their protagonist halos. That evening, after tending to the plants in the greenhouse, Anne made her way to the Great Hall to enjoy the Halloween feast. She had just sat down when Fanny leaned close and whispered, "Why are you here? Shouldn't you be in the bathroom comforting her?" Anne sliced a golden roast chicken leg, took a bite, and replied casually, "I'm here for dinner. Why would I go to the bathroom? But your good friend Hermione is crying in there. I just overheard Patty from Gryffindor say she saw Hermione rush into a girls' loo in tears earlier." "Wait, Hermione, crying in the bathroom? That wasn't in the plot, was it? Didn't the three of them defeat a troll together?" Anne dug deep into her fuzzy memories. "And since when was she considered Hermione's good friend? When did I become her good friend?" Anne muttered, determined to squash any misunderstanding at its roots. "But you've talked to her a few times. And didn't you lend her that map once?" "That was only because I accidentally mentioned it and had to let her take a quick peek to satisfy her curiosity, just to keep her from blabbing. But that's not something I can explain to a kid. Just talking a few times makes us friends? By that logic, I'm friends with Malfoy too. She and I just know each other." Anne reached over to grab a baguette and a cup of English milk tea from in front of Fanny. Fanny gave her a weird look but said nothing, turning instead to nibble slowly on a lamb chop. Anne was halfway through a bite of pumpkin pie when the doors to the great hall suddenly burst open. Professor Quirrell stumbled in, wild-eyed and panicked. "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." He collapsed to the floor mid-sentence. Panic exploded across the hall. Anne cast a mournful glance at the feast spread before her. "I hadn't even finished eating." It took several loud firework-like blasts from Dumbledore's wand to restore order. "Prefects," he called, his voice calm yet commanding. "Lead your houses back to their dormitories at once." The prefects immediately began organizing the students into lines. In the middle of Slytherin's group, Fanny tugged urgently on Anne's sleeve. Her face was tight with worry. "Anne! There's someone who doesn't know what's happening." "Who?" Anne asked, thinking Fanny was just scared. "Hermione. She didn't come to dinner, she's still in the bathroom. She doesn't know about the troll. What if she runs into it?" Anne's heart skipped a beat. "That shouldn't happen, right?" Okay, she had to admit, her memory of the finer details was basically gone. She only vaguely remembered key plot points. In the first movie, the three of them bonded over defeating the troll, Harry got the Philosopher's Stone, and Quirrell turned out to be evil. Hermione was the main character, she wouldn't die in the first book. If anything happened, it should be in the Chamber of Secrets. Fanny added nervously, "I saw a troll once when I was little. It was huge. Terrifying." Anne craned her neck, trying to see the Gryffindor line ahead of them. "Can you check if Harry and Ron are still there?" Fanny stood on tiptoe. "They're there, they're going up the stairs." Anne frowned. She didn't want to get involved with the trio, and it would be best if the plot stayed intact. But knowing what she now knew, she couldn't just do nothing. "They're leaving, Anne." Fanny's voice was growing panicked. "All right, I get it. Fanny, here's what you'll do. Follow the prefect back to the dorms and keep an eye on Harry and Ron. If they slip away, don't worry about it. I'll talk to the professors." Without waiting for a reply, Anne darted around the Slytherin group and headed toward Professor Snape and Professor McGonagall, who were kneeling beside the unconscious Quirrell. Snape's face grew even colder at the sight of her. He opened his mouth, likely to scold her for not returning to the dorms, but Anne spoke first, putting on a worried and urgent expression. "Professor Snape, I think I just saw one, or maybe two, students break away from the group. I'm not sure which house they were from, but I saw them heading toward the upstairs bathrooms." McGonagall's eyes widened in alarm. She exchanged a quick look with Snape. Snape stared at Anne as if trying to detect a lie, then finally said, "All right. Thank you, Miss Reeve. Now return to your dormitory." Anne nodded and quickly ran off. Back in the Slytherin common room, it was absolute chaos. The place was packed, and the feast had been brought in from the kitchens. Fanny rose as soon as she saw Anne, but Anne hurried over and plopped down beside her. No way was she giving up one of the few empty seats. "I told the professors," Anne whispered while picking up a slice of raisin cheese. "They're on it." "What about your side?" "They slipped off right after going up the stairs," Fanny said. "Then we're good." Anne quickly downed the cheese and reached for a mini pork floss cake. The next day at breakfast, Anne learned that Gryffindor had been awarded 5 points, and surprisingly, so had Slytherin. Apparently, by the time the professors reached the bathroom, Harry and Ron were already battling the troll. They managed to hold it off until help arrived. Hermione had taken the blame for sneaking off, and the professors saw Harry and Ron as heroes helping a friend. Gryffindor lost 5 points due to Hermione's actions but gained 10 thanks to Harry and Ron. As for Slytherin, Anne's timely warning had earned them their own 5 points. When Anne sat down at the table and saw the way Malfoy was glaring at her, she felt like even jumping into the Nile wouldn't wash that look off. Fanny was grinning at her mischievously. As soon as Anne sat down, she leaned in and whispered, "Hermione asked me to tell you, she wants to meet you this afternoon in the library. Second floor. Quidditch section." "I'd rather not. What do you think?" Anne nearly choked on her bread. Fanny shot a glance at the trio at the Gryffindor table, then gave Anne a bright-eyed nod. "I think you should go." "Fine." Just to make things clear, Anne thought. "From now on, I'm staying far away from the trio's business." She recalled a letter she'd recently received from Aaron. He'd praised her actions with Malfoy, calling her clever, lively, and adorable, and encouraged her to keep it up. That afternoon, Anne and Fanny arrived at the library. From the door, Fanny immediately spotted the trio on the first floor. They were already watching the entrance and lit up when they saw Anne. Then the three of them headed up to the second floor. Fanny nudged Anne with her elbow. "They're going up. Go on." Anne tucked a flipping silver sickle back into her pocket. "I will, but not too fast." She took her time settling at a table, unpacked her books, and worked on her homework for a bit before finally grabbing a parchment slip with a book title and making her way upstairs. The second floor of the library was lined with towering shelves and very few people on a Monday afternoon. Anne walked calmly to the Quidditch section. The trio was there, and they looked happy to see her. They exchanged glances. Ron nudged Harry, but Harry stayed quiet. Hermione spoke first. "I asked them to come with me. We just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" Anne's tone was flat. "I heard from the professors, you were the one who told them you saw someone sneaking off. If not for you, we'd never have survived the troll." "And with Malfoy," Ron added, excited, "that was brilliant. You really put him in his place. I bet that's the first time anyone's ever done that to him." Harry nodded along. "Are you done?" Anne's voice didn't change. The three of them were caught off guard by her cold reaction. "If you think those things mean I wanted to help you, let me set that straight. I retaliated against Malfoy because he provoked me. As for the troll, I only went to the professors because Fanny asked me to. And I didn't know it was you. But on the Quidditch field, after class, you said McGonagall wouldn't expel Harry." "I heard you," Ron said quickly. "I was stating a fact, answering Fanny's question." "You gave me candy on the train," Ron insisted. "We made a trade. You told me how to open the wrappers." Harry and Ron looked at each other, speechless. Hermione tried again, more hesitantly. "But in the library, you told me not to read Quidditch books, that was helping me, right?" "I was bored and being nosy," Anne said coolly. Then, without giving them a chance to speak again, she added, "Besides, I'm a Slytherin. Why would I help Gryffindors?" And with that, she turned and walked away. The trio stared after her. "I think she just doesn't want to be close to us," Harry said finally. "Maybe because she's in Slytherin," Ron muttered. "But she did help us." Hermione, meanwhile, was still staring at the shelves. She whispered, "Why, though?" She didn't believe Anne's words. If she was just being nosy, why had her advice been so thoughtful? Anne, of course, had no idea what they were thinking. From her perspective, acting cold was the fastest way to be forgotten. Kids moved on quickly, they'd find new friends and new drama in no time. That was for the best, she thought. As long as Dumbledore was around, Hogwarts was a safe place. She'd study what she was interested in, then maybe disappear for a while. Let the main characters save the world. Thinking about the Eastern Wizarding World, Anne recalled a book she'd read called An Introduction to the Eastern Wizarding World. It was about India, its magical history, and how much of its modern magical system came from British colonialism. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, You can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 12, The Glass Orb. By mid-November, the weather had turned bitterly cold. The mountains surrounding the school were shrouded in a grey haze, dusted with snow, and a thick layer of ice had formed on the lake. Every morning, frost coated the ground. Anne hated getting up in such weather. She had even been skipping her trips to the greenhouse lately. More often than not, Fanny would bring her breakfast from the Great Hall and drag her out of bed just in time to rush to class at the sound of the bell. This Tuesday morning was no different. Fanny was pulling a half-asleep Anne toward the classroom while she munched on a piece of bread, eyes barely open. Their first class of the day was History of Magic with the Gryffindors. The bell rang just as they stepped inside. The Slytherins were already used to Anne's groggy morning routine. They had been shocked the first time, but soon grew envious. No one liked waking up early, but it took a friend like Fanny to fetch your breakfast and get you out of bed. The Gryffindors, on the other hand, were seeing this for the first time. Ron leaned over to Harry and whispered, "Do you think she's actually awake?" Harry glanced back. Anne was chewing on bread, her chin resting on her open textbook, which Fanny had just pulled from her bag. "Probably not," he replied. Even Hermione, sitting in the front row, occasionally turned around to glance at her. Some of the Gryffindors murmured among themselves, "Can you eat breakfast in class? Is that allowed? I doubt this is her first time." I saw Fanny carrying food toward the Slytherin common room one morning. Lucky girl. I'd love to sleep in like that. Their whispers remained quiet, and Professor Binns didn't notice. He was droning on in his usual monotone, reading directly from the textbook. About half an hour into the lesson, Anne's eyes fluttered open. She blinked at the classroom, dazed, then slowly lifted her head and continued chewing. She gave Fanny a grateful glance, but Fanny was too busy scribbling notes to notice. Finishing her bread, Anne rummaged through her bag and pulled out a 400 ml glass bottle filled with milk. Popping the wooden stopper, a bit of steam curled from the opening. She took a sip, then drank the rest in contented gulps. Next, she retrieved two small, palm-sized glass orbs filled with pale blue liquid. She handed one to Fanny and held the other between her hands before finally opening her book and beginning to take notes. During the break between the two back-to-back classes, several students took notice of the blue glass orbs. Curious, Pansy walked over and asked, "What is that?" "It's pretty." Her question made nearly the entire class turn their attention toward Anne. Still busy catching up on notes, Anne gave Fanny a look, silently asking her to handle it. Though Fanny had been raised in a disciplined household, she was still a child, and right now, she was holding what might be the magical world's first of its kind. She couldn't hide her excitement. Holding up the orb, she explained, "It contains Dittany." At that name, Neville gasped. All eyes turned to him. Fanny paused. Neville flushed red and stammered, It's just. Dittany is extremely hard to cultivate, and we don't even study it until 4th year herbology." Malfoy scoffed. "Yeah, right. Like you'd know what they teach in 4th year herbology." Neville's face turned redder. "My gran told me, and she wouldn't lie to me." He looked toward Anne, as if hoping she'd speak up. Anne hadn't expected anyone to recognize the plant. Still, she paused her notes and said, "He's right. It's in 4th year herbology." That alone made several students gasp. They were only in 1st year, and even their current herbology course felt difficult. Now someone was saying she could handle 4th year material. But Neville hesitated, but added bravely, "Dittany is supposed to be red." All eyes turned to Anne, waiting for her to explain. Malfoy grinned smugly. Let's see how Miss Reeve explains her blue Dittany." Neville now looked pale, seeming to realize he might have messed up. Anne sighed. Check pages 246 to 260 in 30 Rare Magical Plants, that's the 4th year herbology text. It clearly describes the different types, colors, and properties of Dittany. It's indeed red, but incredibly unstable. It can combust just from exposure to air. Keeping it in solid form is already difficult, liquid is even harder. So, I combined it with blue wisteria bloom and silver moon herb. One is from 3rd year herbology, the other 4th year. Their neutralizing properties stabilize the formula, resulting in a blue liquid. Does that satisfy you, Mr. Malfoy? Silence fell over the room. Malfoy's pale face flushed, but he said nothing more. Hermione was the one to break the quiet. So, what does it do? Anne glanced at her, unfazed. Fanny, explain it. I still have notes to copy. Fanny was a bit stunned. She hadn't realized the orb was made with such rare ingredients. But she dutifully answered, Anne said it can produce steady warmth for about 2 months. She made it to keep her hands warm in this cold weather. The class erupted. Dittany sounds expensive, doesn't it? She used it for a hand warmer. And not just one plant, 3 magical herbs. I must be dreaming. I need to hit the library after class. Anne muttered under her breath, should have just ignored Pansy's question. Fanny nudged her. You didn't tell me all that was inside it. Anne looked a little wronged. Those plants were about to die anyway, better to make use of them. And it's really cold. I can barely get up in the mornings. By the end of class, everyone passing Anne and Fanny shot envious glances at their orbs. Anne, however, kept her head down, busily taking notes. When Hermione, Harry, and Ron got up to leave the classroom, Fanny elbowed Anne, signaling that they were about to pass by. Anne hesitated, torn. Her mind wandered back to 2 conversations she'd had with Fanny. The night before. Why hasn't your friend Hermione talked to you lately? She's not my friend. Okay, but why hasn't she approached you then? I told them before, I wasn't helping them. I just did what benefited me. But you did help them. No. Well, everyone thinks you did. You wouldn't understand. Last night. Fanny. I need your help. What now? I have transfiguration this afternoon. Professor McGonagall asked to see my notes next class, but I forgot to write them down. Anne, you're the only one in Slytherin required to take notes for transfiguration. That was her special instruction. What were you even doing last class? I thought she'd already checked once, so I slacked off. Fine. I remember some of what she said, I'll recite, you write. Fanny. I have a confession. You're acting strange today. I skipped note-taking, twice. Anne. I feel like I don't even know you. I'm doomed. Not necessarily. There is one way. What? Your ordinary acquaintance Hermione must have notes. I heard she writes everything down. Any other options? None. And remember, we have charms with Gryffindor tomorrow morning. So when Hermione was about to pass her by, Anne weighed her options, face McGonagall's wrath, or talk to the trio again. She chose the latter. Anne stood and stopped Hermione. Hermione blinked in confusion. Anne calmly said, I need to ask you something. Then she glanced at Harry and Ron. Can you two give us a moment? They exchanged looks, then left when Hermione nodded. Once alone, Anne said, I want to borrow your transfiguration notes. Hermione looked puzzled. Why? Because I have transfiguration this afternoon, and I need to copy them. But, we weren't required to take notes. Anne hesitated, then looked at Fanny, who jumped in, because Anne is the only Slytherin required by Professor McGonagall to take notes in that class. But she slacked off and didn't take notes last time. So now, you're her last hope. You mean she's the only one who has to take notes? Hermione tried not to laugh. Yes, that's why she didn't want to tell you herself, Fanny said, glancing at Anne. See? It wasn't that hard to admit. Anne pouted. That's not the real reason. I didn't think you'd have notes either, and besides, the more I get involved with protagonists, the more dangerous it becomes. But she couldn't say any of that aloud, so she remained silent. Hermione and Fanny took her silence as quiet agreement. Hermione handed her a notebook. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Hurry and copy it. You've still got some time. Anne took the notebook and, in return, pulled a deep blue orb from her bag. This is for you. Fanny gave Hermione a little wink, encouraging her to accept it. Hermione held it in her hands, warmth instantly spreading through her fingers. It was palm-sized with a tiny cork stopper, and inside, deep blue wisps floated gently through the liquid. It's beautiful. No girl can resist something warm, translucent, and pretty, Anne said. This one lasts 3 months, that's why it's darker than the one I gave Fanny. I reinforced the glass with a spell, so it won't break easily. Even if it does, the contents vanish safely. So it turns clear after 3 months? Hermione asked. Anne paused, then replied with a mysterious smile, it's a little surprise. You'll find out then. Hermione smiled and didn't press further. Later that day, Anne passed McGonagall's notebook inspection without a hitch. A/N wrote this whole chapter in one go, feeling great. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 20+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 13, Quidditch. Another week passed, and by Friday, the entire school was buzzing about Saturday's Quidditch match. This would be Harry's first official game since joining the Gryffindor Quidditch team. And this match was against Slytherin. If Gryffindor won, they'd rise to second place on the scoreboard and would be one step closer to winning the Quidditch Cup. Saturday arrived right on schedule, and, surprisingly, it was a rare sunny day, one of the few clear days since winter began. The match was set to start at 11 o'clock, but by 10:30, the stands were already packed with students. When Anne finally arrived at 10:50 and found a seat next to Fanny, the stands were completely full. The Quidditch pitch was about the size of 2 football fields and was surrounded by towering stands. At either end of the field stood 3 50-foot-tall golden poles topped with hoops. 2 teams of 7 players each took to the sky on flying broomsticks. The players included 1 keeper, 3 chasers, 2 beaters, and 1 seeker. What made Quidditch so unique was that it involved not just 1, but 3 different types of balls. The quaffle, a red ball about the size of a football, was passed between chasers. The goal was to throw it through the opposing team's hoops to score 10 points. The keeper's job was to block these attempts. Then there were 2 smaller, black, and highly aggressive balls called bludgers. These rogue balls zoomed around on their own, trying to knock players off their brooms. The beaters used bats to defend their teammates and redirect the bludgers toward the other team. Lastly, there was the golden snitch, a walnut-sized gold ball with silver wings. It was lightning fast, and the seeker's only task was to catch it. Whichever seeker caught the snitch earned 150 points for their team and ended the match. Anne glanced around the stands. Apart from the Slytherin section, the other 3 houses were all waving Gryffindor flags and shouting cheers for them. Looks like Slytherin really is unpopular at Hogwarts, Anne muttered under her breath. Fanny sat beside her, perfectly upright but craning her neck forward, eyes fixed on the field. Malfoy and the Slytherin first years were squeezed into the front row, loudly shouting, Slytherin! Slytherin! Right next to them was the Gryffindor section. At the front, a massive banner stretched across the stands, featuring a roaring red lion and bold, glittering letters that read "Victory to Harry Potter." The paint shimmered with magic. Behind the banner were Hermione, Ron, Neville, and a whole bunch of excited Gryffindor first years. At precisely 11 o'clock, the 2 teams flew onto the field to a roar of cheers. Madame Hooch served as the referee. After a quick introduction, Madame Hooch blew her whistle, and the players soared into the air. As the match began, Anne pulled out 2 pairs of omnioculars from her bag and handed one to Fanny. "Here, take this." Fanny looked surprised. "I thought you weren't interested in Quidditch." "What's this for?" "I got them this morning. Aaron's obsessed with Quidditch. He sent me a few pairs, along with a note saying that even if I break them while cheering, he has more. Since he already sent them, might as well use them." Once she could clearly see the action on the field, Anne finally understood why Slytherin was so disliked. They repeatedly and blatantly committed fouls to prevent Gryffindor from scoring, but Quidditch rules didn't allow for players to be sent off, no matter how many fouls they committed. Halfway through the game, the golden snitch still hadn't been spotted. Anne had grown tired of tracking the players with her omnioculars, so she decided to focus on the 3 hoops on Slytherin's side. Most of the scoring opportunities happened near the goalposts anyway. Suddenly, Fanny gasped and tugged on Anne's sleeve. "Anne! Look at Harry, something's wrong." "Where?" Anne followed her gaze, and sure enough, Harry was clutching his broom tightly as it shuddered and jerked erratically in the air. The entire stadium began to notice. Harry's broom was no longer just shaking, it was spinning in midair. Alarmed gasps rang out. The Weasley twins from the Gryffindor team tried to fly over to rescue him, but every time they got close, Harry's broom only shook more violently. Anne's eyes darted to the staff section of the stands. Professor Quirrell was staring intensely at Harry, lips moving silently. "The Dark Lord is starting to act," Anne thought grimly. Just then, a new wave of panic swept through the crowd. Harry was thrown from his broom, dangling in midair by one hand. Anne glanced back at the Gryffindor section. Hermione was no longer there. She looked again at Professor Quirrell, just in time to see Hermione crashing into him, knocking him over. Good, Anne thought. Crisis averted. Back on the field, Harry had climbed back onto his broom, but now he was diving sharply toward the ground, one hand over his mouth. When he finally landed, hunched over and coughing, something gold fell into his palm. "I caught the snitch," he shouted, standing up and holding it high above his head. The match was over. Gryffindor had won, 170-60. The entire crowd, except for the Slytherin section, rose to applaud. Even some Slytherins clapped, though each one received a vicious glare from Malfoy. Fanny clapped too, but Malfoy didn't dare glare at her. Anne didn't clap. Her eyes were on the staff stands, where Professor Snape was frantically trying to put out a fire on his robes. He looked furious. So even Professor Snape can make faces like that, Anne mused. Not long after the match, December arrived, bringing even colder weather, and with it, the countdown to Christmas. As the holiday approached, Anne found herself in better and better spirits, especially when she received a letter from Aaron 5 days before Christmas. That letter left Anne in a fantastic mood all day. So when Hermione stopped her and Fanny on their way to dinner that evening, Anne didn't immediately brush her off. Instead, she followed Hermione behind a stone pillar. "I have a question for you," Hermione said directly. "It's about a name." Anne blinked. She figured answering a single name probably wouldn't cause too much trouble, but she still decided to hear her out first. "Go ahead. Do you know anything about Nicholas Flamel?" "Him? His name's on the back of Dumbledore's chocolate frog card. Other than that, I don't know much." "That should be fine," Anne reasoned. "If it's printed on candy cards, it's probably not a big deal." Still curious, she asked, "Why are you asking? Is it for a history of magic assignment?" Hermione's eyes lit up slightly, but all she said was thanks, before hurrying away. When Anne returned to the table, Fanny was cutting into a black pepper steak. Seeing Anne sit down, she asked, "What did she want?" "She asked about someone named Nicholas Flamel. I told her I saw the name on Dumbledore's chocolate frog card." Nicholas Flamel the alchemist? Why would she ask about him? She left before I could ask. You know who he is? Nicholas Flamel, the great alchemist. He's the only wizard known to have created the Philosopher's Stone. He's kind of a legend. I heard he's friends with Dumbledore. Anne's fork slipped, dropping a roasted potato onto the table. The Philosopher's Stone. Yeah, the legendary stone that grants immortality. Oh. Anne kept her expression neutral, but inside she was berating herself. How could I have let my guard down just because I was in a good mood? Thankfully, she'd only revealed the name's source. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 14, Christmas, Part 1. 4 days before Christmas, in the Slytherin common room, Fanny was enthusiastically telling Anne about her ski trip to the Swiss Alps during last year's holiday break. Anne, sitting beside her, listened intently. In her previous life, Anne had never been abroad. Even after arriving in Britain, she hadn't had the chance to explore much. She had only been to London 3 times, twice to Diagon Alley and once to visit Jill's secondary school. Now that she had the means, Anne was determined to travel and see more of Europe whenever the opportunity arose. Anne, where will you be spending Christmas? Fanny asked suddenly, pausing in her story. I saw your name on the departure list. At my uncle's. He wrote yesterday to say he's received the necessary documents from the Muggle world. So officially speaking, he's my guardian now. I'll be moving into his house, or rather, I should say our house now, Anne replied with a natural smile. That's wonderful. Congratulations, Anne, Fanny said sincerely. Then she added, give me your address. That way, we can write to each other during the holidays. It's 12 Shaftesbury Avenue, West End, London. Shaftesbury Avenue in the West End? That's in the inner city. It must be an old, historic house. Anne, I just realized I never asked, what's your uncle's surname? His full name is Aaron Hall. Hall? Anne, don't tell me you've never heard of the Hall family. Anne blinked in surprise. She genuinely didn't know what was so special about that name. Aaron had always told her he was just an employee in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. I really don't know, she said honestly. It's in the Comprehensive Guide to European Wizarding Families. The Hall family is an old French wizarding family based in Paris, though they have branches all over Europe. I guess your uncle must be from the British branch. That also explains why he owns a house on Shaftesbury Avenue. You should definitely look up that book. Yeah. I think I really should. Anne realized she'd overlooked something important. In the wizarding world, especially in Europe, a person's surname carried weight. Cultural differences had made her ignore that fact. Then, suddenly, a new thought struck her, her parents' surnames. She had long suspected that they, like Harry's, had been killed by Voldemort. But what about the rest of her family? Her father's side was likely a Muggle, after all, his brother, Garnet Reeve, was a Muggle. But her mother? Aaron had said her mother was a pure-blood witch, meaning she came from a wizarding family. Yet Anne had never even thought to ask about her mother's background. Fanny, have you ever heard of the Roland family? She asked abruptly. The Roland family? Of course. They're quite unique among British wizarding families. Unique? How so? I remember reading about them. They're a relatively new family, only about 100 years old, and they have very few members. The book said they were a branch that split off from a much older, pure-blood reclusive wizarding family. But it didn't mention which family, just that the Rolands emerged in 1873 from such a lineage. Do you know if there are any living members? Fanny frowned. Not really. That book barely mentioned the Rolands. I only remembered them because the idea of a reclusive pure-blood family intrigued me. Why are you asking about them, Anne? No particular reason. I just came across the name and got curious. Also, the idea that there are hidden wizarding families still out there, it's fascinating. Anne forced herself to calm down. Perhaps Aaron didn't want her to know about this yet. Maybe it was something she wasn't supposed to find out too early. She trusted that if he wanted to tell her, he would, when the time was right. I asked my parents about those hidden families too, but they wouldn't tell me anything, Fanny said, a bit deflated. Well, that's the nature of secrets. If they can be told, they're no longer secrets. Anyway, it's getting late. Time to sleep. Tomorrow morning I'm going home for Christmas. Fanny beamed and went back to her dorm. The next morning, Fanny had already changed out of her school uniform and robes into a cozy set of winter clothes. She didn't forget to wake Anne either. Anne! Get up, you've got a train to catch. All right, all right. I'm getting up. Anne changed out of her uniform and long robes into casual clothes. It felt strange, like she'd been yanked out of the Middle Ages and into the modern world. When she was done changing, Fanny gave her a once-over and commented, "Wow! I'm not used to seeing you like this. Ever since we met, you've always been in uniform or robes." "Yeah, even I'm not used to it. But I guess everyone feels that way," Anne said, while packing up her things. "Aren't you bringing anything home? The train leaves at 10, right?" "I'm not taking the train, Anne." "Then how are you getting home?" "I'm using Floo powder. That's how I came to Hogwarts, too. My family's fireplace is connected to the Floo network. I'll just use the one in Professor Dumbledore's office." Anne looked at her in admiration. "It must be nice having privileges. Too bad we won't get to chat on the train." Fanny blushed. "Maybe next time. My grandmother just worries that I'm too young to travel alone by train." After finishing her packing, Anne slung her bag over her shoulder and gave Fanny a bright smile. "Well then, Miss Fanny, Merry Christmas in advance. See you after the holiday." Fanny ignored the miss and replied, "Merry Christmas, Anne. See you after the break." On the lawn in front of Hogwarts Castle, a group of students in regular winter clothes were gathered, chatting and laughing. Hermione had taken off her usual Gryffindor uniform and was wearing a jacket over a high-necked sweater, chatting with Pavarti Paddle. Pavarti, a Gryffindor, had a twin sister named Padma in Ravenclaw. Anne stood on the castle steps, gazing out at the group. For a moment, she felt a little dazed. Then, spotting Hermione walking toward her with purpose, she quickly moved off the steps to blend into the crowd. Too late. Hermione caught up and beamed at her. "Hey! Anne, I was just looking for you. I thought you'd be staying at school. You're going home for Christmas too." Anne had braced herself to fend off more questions, but relaxed upon hearing it was just small talk. "Yup. It's going to be a great Christmas, I'm going home." "Home? So, your uncle?" "Yes. He got the Muggle paperwork done, so I'm moving in with him over the holiday." The thought made Anne smile again. "I'm really happy for you, Anne," Hermione said sincerely. Anne's ears turned pink. She looked away and asked, "What about Ron and Harry? Are they staying?" "Harry didn't want to go back, and Ron's parents are away." At that moment, Hagrid's booming voice rang out across the lawn. "First years, follow me. We've got to take the boats back the way we came." Anne turned to Hermione. "Hear that? Time to go." Hermione seemed like she wanted to say more, but followed Anne with a smile. "We can talk more on the train." Anne nearly tripped. Note to self, say nothing. Don't spoil the plot. No adventures with the trio. Stay quiet. By the time the first years reached the platform, the upper year students had already boarded. Remembering Aaron's advice, Anne headed straight for the rear carriages of the Hogwarts Express. Those were usually the least crowded. Sure enough, the last carriage was completely empty. She picked a compartment and sat down, with Hermione following her in. "Why did we walk all the way to the last carriage?" Hermione asked curiously. As Anne set her bag down, heavy despite the undetectable extension charm, she explained, "Uncle Aaron told me the rear cars are usually emptier. I didn't want to fight through the crowd to find a spot." "But this is the Christmas break," Hermione said. "A lot of people stayed behind. The last 2 cars are probably completely empty." "Oh." Anne froze, ears going red again. "Well." Hermione burst into laughter. It was rare to see Anne flustered like this. She was usually so calm and reserved. "Anne, you're adorable when you're like this." Anne bristled at the word adorable but couldn't think of a proper retort, so she just turned away and tried to stay calm. "She's just a kid." "Just a kid." Hermione stifled another giggle and decided to keep the conversation light. "So, Anne, what are you planning to do over the 20-day break?" Anne turned back toward her. "Honestly, I haven't thought too much about it. But I do want to decorate my room and set up my greenhouse. That should take a lot of time." "You have a greenhouse? Wow! Your new place must be huge." "It's a small one, really. Nothing like the school's greenhouses. I think it can hold about 20 pots of magical plants. And of course, I'll need to work on my homework. Every professor assigned something." "I've already finished my history of magic homework," Hermione said. "It required so many reference books, I couldn't possibly take them all home. I also borrowed a few books I'm interested in. My suitcase is already full." Anne glanced at Hermione's bulging suitcase. "Yep. A true overachiever. So, you're spending the whole holiday with your homework and books?" "Mostly, yet. There's still so much I don't know about the wizarding world. I'll also visit some relatives, my parents always do that over the holidays." "Oh. Anne, I don't think I asked for your address yet." 12 Shaftesbury Avenue, West End, London. "Got it. Brilliant. Now I can write to you over the break. I'll definitely have questions about herbology." "Sure. At least she's not asking about dangerous adventures," Anne thought. "Maybe I'll have a few transfiguration questions for you too. Oh, and my herbology assignment has this part where..." The rest of the train ride was filled with animated discussion about schoolwork. By the time they arrived, Anne was utterly drained. Hermione's enthusiasm for studying far exceeded any bookworm she'd met in her past life. When they parted ways at the station, Hermione hugged Anne tightly. Anne didn't even have the energy to resist, she just wanted to get home and sleep. "Anne, it was so great talking to you. Merry Christmas. See you after the holiday," Hermione said brightly. Anne gave a tired nod and walked out of the station. Outside, Aaron was waiting by a small car. When he spotted Anne, he jogged over and ruffled her hair. This time, Anne didn't resist. He looked concerned. "Little Anne, what's wrong? Did someone bully you?" Anne shook her head. "No, Uncle Aaron. I'm just really glad to see you. It's just, someone talked my ear off about homework for the entire train ride." "Oh, that's hours of studying." Aaron laughed. "You're working too hard." He took her bag and placed it in the car. "Come on, let's take you back to the orphanage. You need rest. I'll come pick you up around 4 tomorrow afternoon. Does that work?" "Yeah, that's perfect, Uncle Aaron. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 15, Christmas, Part 2. The next morning, Anne got out of bed at the orphanage and had already pushed yesterday's long chat with Hermione to the back of her mind. After all, the most important things today were meeting Jill and going home. Once she was up, Anne packed all her belongings again. She kept the small blue box in her plot notebook on her at all times, those were her most important items. On the desk were some old elementary school notebooks, 3 years' worth of memories. She packed them neatly into a corner, those too, she would be taking with her. From the drawer, she retrieved a small copper bell, Jill's birthday gift to her, though it was now broken. Fortunately, now that she could use magic, fixing it would be a matter of a single spell. As for her clothes, she left them all behind. Most of the resources at the orphanage, clothing, school supplies, came from donations. These things were better left for others who needed them. After packing, Anne went to find Jill. They spent the entire afternoon talking. Originally, Anne had planned to return to the orphanage by noon for lunch, but when Jill heard she was leaving, she burst into tears and wouldn't stop. Anne had no choice but to stay and comfort her. She even ended up having lunch at Jill's home. It wasn't until Anne repeatedly promised to write her letters and never forget her that she was finally able to leave. Although Jill had disrupted Anne's plan to explain things properly to the headmistress, Odette, Anne didn't blame her at all. On the way back, she couldn't help but reflect on her 3 years of elementary school. Because she was small and cute, she was often teased by the boys in her class, pranks from the moment she walked in until the final bell. Even with her adult mind, her child-sized body had its limitations. Jill had been the one to stand up for her back then. That rare friendship had once brought her great comfort. Odette and Miss Ida from the orphanage were kind as well, but with over 100 orphans to care for, they were more like well-meaning elders than close companions. Back at the orphanage, Anne gave a simple explanation to Odette, that her uncle Aaron was a kind man who had noticed her strong academic performance and wanted to adopt her, as per the Muggle paperwork. He would be arriving at 4 p.m. to complete the adoption, and they had already spoken and agreed it was a good match. Odette was initially surprised but quickly became genuinely happy that Anne had met someone kind at school. When Aaron arrived and even offered a donation to the orphanage, which Anne had suggested, exchanging wizarding currency for pounds at Gringotts, Odette gratefully completed the paperwork. Aaron loaded Anne's luggage into the car, and she waved goodbye to the headmistress before hopping in. As they drove away, she turned to Aaron with a beaming smile. "Uncle Aaron, this is amazing. I can't wait to see our home." Aaron reached over to ruffle her hair. "I hope you'll like the house." "I'm sure I will." Anne squinted happily at the road ahead. Aaron drove into the city, weaving through streets before pulling up in a narrow 2-lane road. On one side stood rows of townhouses, and on the other were fenced-in yards with trees and grass, some fenced with wooden slats, others with brick walls. Parking spaces were marked along the curb by the houses, while the lane by the yards was reserved for through traffic. London's urban planning really was impressive. They hadn't encroached on private property, and traffic still flowed on these old, narrow streets. But Aaron, ever the wizard, grumbled. He magically held the steering wheel in place and muttered, "These muggles and their rules. You have to park exactly inside these tiny little rectangles." Anne ignored his complaints, her eyes already locked on the house across the street. The exterior walls were painted white, though some peeling paint on the 3rd floor revealed the red brick beneath. The 3-story townhouse stood between 2 others. The front door, thick and dark like something off Baker Street, had a brass plaque, number 12. 4 wood-framed windows flanked the door on the 1st floor, but with the curtains drawn, it was impossible to see inside. After they parked, Aaron handed Anne the key and told her to open the door while he fetched her things from the trunk. She eagerly accepted, running to the door and looking up at the house's facade. She inserted the key into the lock below the handle and turned it open. Inside was a typical British foyer, narrow and warm, with a heavy coat rack of dark wood. But before she could admire much else, a high-pitched voice suddenly came from the living room. "Welcome home, Master Aaron." Anne jumped. A small, skinny creature with bat-like ears and bulging eyes like ping-pong balls stood in front of her. With a long, flat nose and dressed in a ragged burlap vest, it was a house elf. He was a head shorter than Anne and looked just as startled by her as she was by him. The elf quickly bowed. "Oh, Miss Reeve, or wasn't trying to scare you? Or just wanted to greet Master Aaron and Miss Reeve?" Realizing what he was, Anne relaxed slightly. Just then, Aaron entered carrying her things and looked over. "Oh, I forgot to tell you, that's Orby, the house elf. He handles all the chores around here." Orby beamed and bowed again, clearly pleased by the introduction. Anne tilted her head. "Uncle Aaron, I read in a book that house elves usually belong to old, wealthy wizarding families. How come you have one? And why does he call you Master Aaron?" Aaron instructed Orby to take Anne's things upstairs, then walked with her to the cozy living room where a fire crackled in the hearth. Sitting down in an armchair, he smiled. "Well, Anne, it's a long story. Basically, I, Aaron Hall, come from an old French wizarding family, the Hall family. My branch is part of the British side of that family." He paused, trying to explain in a way a child might understand. "Let's put it this way. A long time ago, all my ancestors were French. But as the family grew, some of them moved to England and became a branch family. Later, the main branch back in France went through some bad times." "Was it war? Like World War I or II? We learned about that in history class," Anne asked. Aaron blinked, then nodded. "Yes, something like that. Muggles talk about war with little kids already? That's something." Before he could digress further, Anne brought him back. "So, what happened next?" "Ah, right. Later, the French side had fewer people left, so they started calling in young children from across Europe, branch family kids, to come study at the main estate. It was this big manor and castle, just a little smaller than Hogwarts. It was a wonderful time. We were all the same age, running around making trouble. There was one time we even pranked a very strict elder." He laughed sheepishly. "Anyway, those days lasted until we turned 11, and everyone left for their own wizarding schools. I went to Hogwarts and met your parents. They were brilliant." After some reminiscing, he smiled at Anne. "Oh, I just have so many memories I want to share with you. I've been listening closely, Uncle Aaron. But why wasn't Orby here last time? You didn't mention him." "Oh, Orby used to take care of me in France. His family has served the Hall family for generations. I only brought him over recently. Before, I was always traveling for work, so there wasn't much need. But now that you're living here, having Orby around is perfect." He grinned. "Besides, I'm hopeless at housework." Anne checked the time. It was already 5:20 p.m. They had arrived around 4:40. Thinking of what Fanny had said about wizarding families, she decided to test him a bit. "Uncle Aaron, are all wizard families like that? With castles and everything? Do I come from one too? A castle just slightly smaller than Hogwarts sounds amazing." Aaron chuckled at her curious tone. "Well, Anne, Reeve isn't really a family name in the magical world. Your father was a talented wizard, sure, but before getting his Hogwarts letter, he lived entirely in the Muggle world and knew nothing about magic. I suspect one of his ancestors may have been a wizard. That would explain why your Uncle Garnet is a Muggle, and why your dad was sorted into Slytherin." Then Aaron's expression stiffened slightly, but he recovered quickly. "As for your mother, she was an incredibly smart witch too. Anyway, it's getting late. You haven't even seen your greenhouse yet. It's out in the yard. I spent the whole day building it." He led Anne through the living and dining rooms to the backyard. Anne thought to herself, so it really is a secret, something about my mother must not be told. Could it be related to Voldemort? But she quickly dismissed the thought. Never mind. That's still far off in the future. And if anything does happen, there are plenty of taller people to handle it. A kid like me wouldn't be much help anyway. All those thoughts vanished the moment she laid eyes on the small greenhouse in the corner of the yard. Her love for magical plants won out in the end. A/N, this chapter is a bit of a transition, just filling in some of Erin's backstory. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25 plus advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 16, Christmas, Part 3. On Christmas Eve, Anne woke up contentedly in her wide, 1.8-meter bed. No classes, no one calling her to get up at the crack of dawn, and the best part, she could roll around as much as she liked without worrying about falling off. It was a beautiful kind of day. She wandered into the bathroom and washed up lazily. Afterward, she pulled on her usual clothes from the wardrobe, tousled her hair, and padded downstairs in her slippers. As she passed the second floor, Aaron stepped out of his study. He didn't come too close, as he had some unknown substance stuck to his clothes. Leaning casually against the doorframe, arms crossed, he grinned at her. "Good morning, Anne. Head downstairs and get some breakfast. I'm sure Orby has something tasty waiting for you. He's quite the little elf." "Good morning, Uncle Aaron," Anne returned the smile just as easily. "I'll head down now. We're going to Diagon Alley later, right?" "Right," Aaron nodded. As he watched her turn away, he muttered to himself with a soft chuckle, "Sonia, Lambert, she's doing so well now." Even years later, Aaron would remember this moment clearly, Anne's messy bedhead, her half-dazed, sleepy look, and that relaxed smile. It was a smile completely different from any he had seen back at the orphanage. Downstairs, Anne enjoyed a hearty French-style breakfast made by Orby. By the time she finished, Aaron had also freshened up and come down to join her. As Anne moved toward the door, Aaron reminded her, "We're not driving to the Leaky Cauldron today, we'll use Flo powder." Anne looked pleasantly surprised toward the fireplace. "Our fireplace is connected to the Flo network." "Of course," Aaron said, grabbing a ceramic jar from beside the hearth. "Just grab a handful from this, toss it into the fireplace, step into the green flames, and clearly say your destination." Anne peeked into the jar. Inside was a shimmering white powder. She scooped some up, tossed it into the fireplace, and in a burst of green flame, stepped in. "Diagon Alley," she called. "Brave girl," Aaron commented with a smile, grabbing some powder for himself. Anne barely had time to blink before she found herself standing in the fireplace of a shop in Diagon Alley, the same one she had used before. Aaron appeared right beside her moments later. "How amazing!" Anne exclaimed at her first Flo powder trip. Aaron gave her a non-committal look, then asked, "So, what are we shopping for today, Anne?" "I think we should start with some common magical plant seeds, and a few potion-related tools. I'll need them for my workshop. Also, some basic tools for plant care. I already asked Orby, he said he can help look after them while I'm at school. Oh. And I'd like to buy some more books." As she spoke, they walked deeper into the alley. "Those are all important, Anne. But don't forget, tomorrow is Christmas. You'll need gifts for your friends too." That reminded Anne of the gift she promised Jill. Uncle Aaron, does Diagon Alley have gifts suitable for muggles?" "You want to buy something for Jill, right? There might be something in one of the shops. We can ask the clerk. If not, I'll take you to a muggle store later." Anne suddenly remembered she hadn't yet explored a proper shopping mall in this life. The memories of spending hours in malls with her best friends in her past life rushed back. What were 1990s British shopping centres like, anyway? She couldn't wait to find out. She looked down at her outfit, still clothes from the orphanage. Yes, a shopping trip was long overdue. After purchasing all the magical supplies and arranging for them to be delivered to the house, they visited the general store. Aaron suggested picking out Christmas gifts there. He said it was a great place to find interesting things. However, the shop didn't carry anything suitable for Muggles. The wizarding world was still kept secret from Muggles, and the Ministry of Magic enforced strict rules around that. Anne had no intention of testing those rules. She knew they'd be heading into the Muggle world later anyway. She picked out a delicate magical puppet for Fanny, then remembered Hermione. She had asked for Anne's address on the train, hadn't she? Judging from her attitude, she was definitely going to send a gift. If Hermione sent one and Anne didn't return the gesture, well, that'd be a headache waiting to happen. Fine, etiquette was etiquette. So she made another round through the shop and picked out a beautiful and practical magical quill. Stationery for a studious girl, perfect. Once the gifts were wrapped and tucked into her bag, she and Aaron exited Diagon Alley through the leaky cauldron and stepped into the bustling streets of London. The rest of the afternoon was a whirlwind of excitement. Anne explored shop after shop. 1990s British malls weren't all that different from the ones in the 21st century, aside from the absence of LED billboards and digital screens. Shop fronts had full glass windows, and with Christmas around the corner, every store was running promotions. The streets were packed with shoppers. And so, on the eve of Christmas, Anne indulged herself in a satisfying shopping spree, complete with a British gentleman to carry her bags. When they returned home, Orby had already prepared a lavish Christmas Eve dinner. Anne ate to her heart's content and went to bed full and happy. The next morning, when she woke up, she found 3 small gifts at her bedside. Orby had collected them from the owl in the yard. One was from Aaron, who had asked Orby to deliver it to her room. Anne picked up the topmost box, a small purple one. Inside were several rare magical plant seeds, each individually packed and labeled. It was from Fanny. She really gets me, Anne thought, smiling. The second gift was in a white box, from Hermione. It contained an assortment of chocolates in different flavors. Knew she'd send something, Anne thought, setting it aside on her desk. The last gift was also in a white box, this one from Aaron. Inside was a photo frame. In the photo were 3 young people, smiling brightly at the camera, her parents and Aaron. She placed the frame on the most prominent shelf of her bookcase. After washing up and getting dressed in her brand new clothes, Anne pulled a small bag from a shopping bag. Inside was a men's scarf. She took it with her and headed downstairs. Aaron wasn't on the second floor, so she continued down to the first. The moment she stepped onto the stairs, he looked up from the living room and smiled. "Hey! Merry Christmas, Anne! Merry Christmas, Uncle Aaron! I loved your gift, and I have something for you too." She lifted the little bag in her hand. "Hey!" Aaron looked surprised. "You got me something." Anne walked over to a chair, stood on it, and motioned for him to come closer. When he did, she pulled the scarf out of the bag and carefully wrapped it around his neck. She gave him a once-over. "Not bad. Uncle Aaron, if you changed your hairstyle and kept your clothes a little tidier, you'd be a real heartthrob." Aaron gave a helpless laugh and ruffled her hair. Looking down at the scarf, he said warmly, "I really like it." "Thank you." Anne hopped down from the chair. "Of course. I do have excellent taste, I'm a sophisticated woman of the 21st century." She caught herself just in time and hastily corrected, "I mean, a brilliant witch of the 21st century." Luckily, Aaron didn't notice anything off. He simply nodded and asked Orby to start breakfast. After eating, Anne spent most of the day in her small greenhouse. Though modest in size, it took up nearly a quarter of the backyard. It was enchanted, though from the outside it looked like an ordinary glass house. Much of the house was enchanted, in fact. Muggles couldn't see anything unusual, and Erin had cast a low-level Muggle-repelling charm, so most Muggles wouldn't even register the house. During the holiday, Anne planted over 20 different magical plants. Many were just seedlings, and some had only a single pot. She labeled each plant and recorded its information in a plant log near the greenhouse entrance. Instead of the clumsy, outdated method taught by Professor Sprout, where all plant data was logged by date, Anne used a more scientific approach, drawing on knowledge from her past life. She categorized them by type and assigned codes, like A014 plant type A, specimen 01, and documented growth rates and traits accordingly. She taught the method to Orby too, who was thrilled to help with such an important task for Miss Reeve. He now spent much of his free time assisting in the greenhouse. Besides herbology, Anne was fascinated by potions, particularly how similar it was to chemistry. Her little workshop was mostly stocked with potions equipment. And thanks to a certain employee of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, their basement housed several magical creatures. This meant Anne had plenty of high-quality potion ingredients and could perform many of the experiments she read about in books. Erin, a proud Gryffindor, was also quite skilled in transfiguration. He often helped Anne with her messy homework attempts. Occasionally, Anne would even ask him to drive her out to the countryside with a telescope to observe the stars for her astronomy assignments. As for history of magic, well, Anne had already read enough history books in the library to breeze through those. And if that wasn't enough, she also had an overachieving pen pal named Hermione who regularly sent her letters and homework updates. The peaceful, joyful days flew by. Erin eventually returned to work, this time, on a business trip to Morocco in North Africa. And Anne's 20-day break soon came to an end. On the last day of vacation, she returned to Hogwarts. A/N, back to Hogwarts and the main trio. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon/crimson_lore. Chapter 17, The East. The first headache Anne encountered upon returning to Hogwarts wasn't the Golden Trio, it was waking up. After spending the entire Christmas holiday sleeping in naturally every day, she found it nearly impossible to adjust back to early morning classes in the cold, damp castle. Still, she had no choice. Once again, she had to rely on Fanny to drag her out of bed. Fortunately, Fanny had grown used to Anne's gift